This is Naked Mormonism.
I pledge my life, all that I may have. I will strive to the utmost of my ability to be what you would want me to be.
It's time to find the truth.
And having set our hand to the plow, we will never look back until this work is finished.
Where is the church going?
I have faith that the Constitution will be saved as prophesied by Joseph Smith. But it will not be saved in Washington. It will be saved by enlightened members of this church.
The explicit tag is there for a reason. So if you get offended at what's said, it's not for you. But most importantly,
may you ponder the truths you've heard. May they help you become even better than you were.
Skepticize everything.
Welcome to episode 27 of the Naked Mormonism podcast, the serial Mormon history podcast. I'm Bryce Blankenegel, and thank you for joining me. Last historical timeline episode covered a lot of ground. We were able to follow the majority of the missionary force back from the Promised Land in Missouri all the way back to Kirtland, Ohio. Soon after this, Joe moved down to live with the Johnson family in Hiram, Ohio, along with Emma and their infant adopted twins. Soon after Joe and Emma moved to Hiram, things got heated up really fast. Rigdon preached that Joe was no longer a prophet of God, which, I personally believe that Joe tuned Rigdon up for doing so. And then, of course, Joe was able to calm the whole place down and reassure everybody that he was still totally the one true prophet dude. After this little insurrection was handled, Joe and Rigdon teamed up to finish their inspired translation of the Bible, and of course bring about a whole new era of personal revelations. Of course, these only happened after Rigdon had moved to Hiram as well, and the deliriously dynamic duo were able to really focus on the task at hand. We also introduced a new set of characters to our timeline. Most of them even got their very own name-o nicknames. First off, we had William Wines Phelps, or as we came to know him, Double Dub Phelps. Next, we had John Whitmer, who we called John Goebbels Whitmer. He's the first church official historian / propaganda machine. And finally, we had somebody who is known as providing one of the most faith-based perspective, sanitized, whitewashed, decontaminated, sparklingly spotless autobiographical histories of the church, even our new friend and bankroller Philo Dibble-Dabble. We were also introduced to somebody very, very special to Joe last episode, Miranda Nancy Johnson Hyde Smith Hyde. This is the first time that one of Joe's to-be wives entered our timeline in a very significant way and had a large effect on the timeline as a whole. In the wake of our introduction of Miranda Johnson, we found out that Joe and Rigdon suffered a horrible beating in March of 1832. Of course, the rumors flew that it was because Joe was getting a little frisky with Miranda, as he frequently did, and I made the assumption that this beating may have been in reaction to their little hanky-panky, which, personally, I don't think it's too crazy to assume. The primary piece of evidence I used for this assumption was two people in the mob were Miranda's older brothers, and she was 16 at the time. It makes sense that they would want to teach Joe a proper lesson, and it helps to explain why they wanted to cut his balls off before they tarred and feathered him. So after this beating, when Joe went to visit Rigdon, Hinchpin wanted to kill Joe and, of course, asked his wife for a razor for the purposes of killing Joe. Apparently, he asked Joe for a razor to kill his wife after his wife left the room, which, probably points to something wrong inside of his head, from probably the beating and the fever. Or maybe, he did want to kill Joe because Joe's shenanigans elicited the worst beating of Rigdon's life. All of this is up to speculation, and that's what happens when we try to assign motives to historical situations. There is rarely ever consensus. So, that's just my personal take on the facts. So, now the wrap-up's over, let's get into the meat of this episode and advance our historical timeline. Let's see how far through 1832 we can get as we approach ever closer to the Nauvoo years, when things really start to take off. So in order to kick off the crazy for today, we have to understand the biggest motive behind what was going on in the church during 1832. One of the revelations that Joe and Rigdon received while in Hiram, Ohio, was to compile all the existing revelations and put them together into the Book of Commandments. They had most of the revelations written down in what was called the First Book of Revelations, but they were handwritten by a lot of different people, and they weren't printed for mass distribution. The revelation I'm referring to was received on November 1st, 1831, and it told the leadership to gather all of the revelations together and compile them into the Book of Commandments for the purposes of mass distribution. A lot of things that happen in 1832 after Joe leaves Hiram, Ohio are tied to this one main project of the Book of Commandments. So our new friend Philo Dibble-Dabble was a wealthy guy living in Hiram, Ohio, and he really liked Joe and the church. Upon Joe's arrival to Kirtland, he briefly lived on the farm of Frederick G. Williams, or as we know him, Freddie G. Willie, which, the farm was actually in financial dire straits. So Dibble-Dabble sold a bunch of land, and he gave $400 to Freddie Willie to pay off the debts that he owed. Well, Joe was about to dabble into the Dibble-Dabble Fund once again to finance printing of the Book of Commandments. In order to print a book, an early 19th century individual had a few options. They could write an amazing piece and have it picked up by a publisher. They could write it and finance the printing like the Book of Mormon, or they could just buy a printing press and all of the materials necessary and, just print whatever they like for a fair amount cheaper than any printing store would do it. Joe and company elected for the third option and began setting up their own printer in Jackson County, Missouri, also known as Zion. According to the Dibble-Dabble autobiography, he had to put a little money in to get this done. Quote, "In 1832, I sold my possessions in Ohio, and we being called upon by Joseph to advance monies to purchase the land in Jackson County, I paid $50 for the purpose, and also gave brother Parley P. Pratt $50 to assist him as a pioneer. I was then called on for money to be placed in the hands of brothers Newell K. Whitney and Algernon Sidney Gilbert, who were going to New York to purchase goods to take up to Jackson County, and gave them $300. I joined in with a company led by Brother Thomas B. Marsh and arrived in Independence, Jackson County on the 10th of November. I remained in Independence until spring and then removed to the Whitmer settlement, farther west, where I built a house, fenced 20 acres of land, and put in a garden." End quote. That was from Philo Dibble-Dabble's autobiography. Now, you may be asking, I thought the Whitmers lived in Fayette, New York, so why did Dibble-Dabble say that he moved to the Whitmers west of Independence, Missouri? For the answer to that question, we have to remember back to the missionary force that made the trip out to Missouri in late 1830. This was supposedly the same missionaries that converted Hinchpin Rigdon to Mormonism, but there are plenty of arguments that show that Rigdon knew about the Book of Mormon long before 1830, but, those are aside. Anyway, this missionary force made it to Missouri, and Ollie Cowdery, along with Freddie Willie, went proselyting, while Dick Zybin Peterson and Peter Whitmer moved into a house and got jobs to financially support the mission. During this time, Peter Whitmer briefly lived with a man named Lilburn W. Boggs, who was a Missouri state senator until 1832, when he was elected to the office of lieutenant governor. During the short time that Peter Whitmer was living with and working for Boggs as his tailor, a 12-year-old girl named Mary Elizabeth Rollins was working for Peter Whitmer as an assistant seamstress. Lilburn Boggs needed some new clothes for his new job, as well as a new suit for his inauguration, which were the projects that Peter Whitmer and Mary Rollins were working on together. To get a little background on the Rollins family and where they came from, they were residents of New York that had moved to Kirtland around 1828, not affiliated with Mormonism at the time, of course, because it hadn't been started. When the missionary troop arrived in 1830, they gave a Book of Mormon to Isaac Morley. The 11-year-old Mary asked to borrow the book as the story about it seemed so amazing to her. This is one of the very few copies of the Book of Mormon that had been dropped off in Kirtland, and Isaac Morley wasn't too keen on giving his only copy to an 11-year-old girl. After some persistence, Morley gave in and allowed Mary to take the book home with her, on the condition that she bring the Book of Mormon back to him before breakfast the next morning. The Rollins stayed up all night reading the book, apparently, and Mary was absolutely enthralled with it. The next morning, she took the book back to Isaac Morley, and I'll just let her tell her story from there, and this is taken from her amazing journal writing. She was very faithful in keeping a journal. Quote, "When I reached Brother Morley's, they had been up for only a little while. When I handed him the book, he remarked, 'I guess you did not read it much.' I showed him how far we had read. He was surprised and said, 'I don't believe you can tell me one word of it.' I then repeated the first verse, also the outlines of the history of Nephi. He gazed at me in surprise and said, 'Child, take this book home and finish it. I can wait.'" End quote. Mary's journal entries are just amazing. I just love reading people that keep a faithful journal during this time. She tells her whole story in such graphic detail, and it really gives the reader a sense of what it was like to live in frontier America in the 19th century. You may be wondering why I'm focusing on this girl, Mary Rollins, so much. Well, I'll let her tell us why in another entry she wrote in her journal describing her time in Jackson County working with Peter Whitmer for the newly elected Lieutenant Governor Lilburn Boggs. Quote, "Before or about the time I finished the last chapter, the prophet Joseph Smith arrived in Kirtland and moved into a part of the Newell K. Whitney's house, Uncle Algernon's partner in the mercantile business. While waiting for his goods to be put in order, Brother Whitney brought the prophet Joseph to our house and introduced him to the elder ones of the family. I was not in at the time. In looking around, he saw the Book of Mormon on the shelf and asked how that book came to be there. He said, 'I sent that book to Brother Morley.' Uncle told him how his niece had obtained it. He asked, 'Where is your niece?' Meaning Mary, of course. I was sent for. When he saw me, he looked at me so earnestly, I felt almost afraid. After a moment or two, he came and put his hands on my head and gave me a blessing, the first I ever received, and made me a present of the book and said he would give Brother Morley another. He came in time to rebuke the evil spirits and set the church in order. We all felt that he was a man of God, for he spoke with power and as one having authority in very deed." End quote. All right, knowing Joseph's character, did that creep anybody else out? It kind of got to me, but, let's get a little bit deeper here. This next quote is taken from a statement that Mary made in 1902. Quote, "In 1834, Joseph was commanded to take me for a wife. I was 1,000 miles from him. He got afraid. The angel came to him 3 times, the last time with a drawn sword, and threatened his life. I did not believe." End quote. All right, this is a recurring theme. There is absolutely no way of discussing Mormon history without talking about polygamy. The two are so deeply intertwined that even studying Mormonism can't be properly done until you factor in polygamy. Last episode, we were introduced to Miranda Nancy Johnson that would later become one of Joe's wives, and I said that she marked the first of Joe's wives that we would meet in the timeline. Well, I was wrong, because Joe met Mary Rollins in in early 1831, and met Miranda in late 1831. So risking being wrong later, I believe that Mary was the first of Joe's polygamist wives that shows up in our timeline here, or that he met when he was out in Kirtland area. So let's get a proper sense of how Joe, kind of wrangled Mary in here. He told her that he was commanded 3 times to take her as wife. The first of which he reportedly told her in 1834 when she was 16. Now, I know that is a little creepy, but the thing we read about earlier with him putting his hands on her head and him looking so earnestly at her that she was almost afraid, that's when she was like 13 years old. So that's creepy. I mean, that's just downright weird. I'm just saying, and that's why it kind of creeped me out. So yeah, when she was 16, he came up with a revelation actually telling her, commanding her that she's supposed to be one of his wives. And that's some early accounts. 1834 is some of the earliest accounts that we ever have of Joseph talking to people about polygamy like this. And, you know, I find it fascinating that the first person that he talked to about this was 16 years old at the time. So by 1842, in Nauvoo, Joe was really trying to seal the deal with Mary, and then he told her that it was time to make a decision. He told her that an angel had appeared to him with a drawn sword, and this was the third time that it had happened apparently, and that angel commanded them to be sealed for time and all eternity, lest Joe suffer condemnation. Joe told Mary that she would receive a witness of the truth of polygamy, and yeah, she sort of did. This is from a later statement given by Mary. I believe it was 1905. Quote, Joseph came up the next Sabbath. He said, have you had a witness yet? So this is in dialogue format, so I'll just, kind of read it how it's written in here like it is a book. No, I said. Well, said he, the angel expressly told me you should have. Said I have not had a witness, but I have seen something I have never seen before. I saw an angel, and I was frightened almost to death. I did not speak. He studied a while, and put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. He looked up and said, How could you have been such a coward? Said I was weak. Did you think to say, Father, help me? No, said I. Well, if you had just said that, your mouth would have been opened, for that was an angel of the living God. He came to you with more knowledge, intelligence, and light than I have ever dared to reveal. I said, if that was an angel of light, why did he not speak to me? Said he, you covered your face, and for this reason the angel was insulted. Said I, will it ever come again? He thought a moment and then said, no, not the same one. But if you are faithful, you shall see greater things than that. End quote. Yep, that's the game that Joe was running right there. Now, there's a lot more to Mary's story, and you know, I was pulling all those from journal entries that she had, but her whole story is just so amazing, and the reason I read this is because I wanted to provide a little insight on her life for, a little bit of context to understand what the polygamy was about. Now, I would highly recommend checking out her entire story that's contained in her autobiography. It's a truly harrowing tale, and it puts you there, like right next to her, going through the same trials that Mary experienced both in and out of the church. There will be links to her autobiography, as well as Mormon apologist Brian Hale's deconstruction of her relationship with Joseph in the show notes. All right, let's talk about this for just a minute. I mean, if Joe couldn't get a woman to consent to his, one might call it devious wiles, he would just command them to get married to him. Just a divine revelation. It was from an angel or something. I mean, something that's even crazier is Joe's ability to adapt if he saw that things weren't going his way. So first he would, like with Mary here, he would try to simply seduce the target woman and, keep everything completely secret. If that didn't work, he would command it by telling the story of the angel coming 3 times in the night with a drawn sword and so on and so forth, or, say that it's commanded that we'll be condemned or we'll go to hell if we do not do polygamy. And then, if all of those didn't work, and he knew that he wasn't going to be able to close the deal, and, on this target girl, she just wouldn't consent to being married, Joe would simply tell that target woman that God was testing her like Abraham with Isaac. Of course, God would never command something that he knew his children couldn't do, so the target refusing Joe's advances was nothing more than a trial that God was giving her, wanting her to resist, and she had passed the trial. I mean, really, it's an ingenious game, and no matter what happened with these propositions of polygamous marriages, Joe never lost. Yeah, until Carthage, I guess. But up to that point, he just went hog wild with his wild hog. You see what I mean? Polygamy is so tightly intertwined with Mormon history, and it's necessary to bring up each of these women as they came along in the storyline, just to understand the context of their individual stories as being part of the larger body of history. I'll be pointing out these women when they come up in the storyline, and let their stories develop as the main timeline develops. All right, let's kind of meander back to the church history as opposed to just Joe's sexual escapades. Earlier, I mentioned that Dibble Dabble gave shitloads of money to the church. This was in the midst of the expansion in independence and the desire to print the Book of Commandments and, just empire building in general. So Parley Parker Pratt, as we call him, P Cubed, was given $50 to live on while on mission trips out in the eastern states, while another $50 was given to purchase the land in Jackson County where the printing press would be built. After that, Dibble Dabble gave $300 to Newell K. Whitney, or as we know him, Father Whitney, and a man named Algernon Sidney Gilbert, for the purposes of buying printing materials and a press in New York. Now, we know Newell Whitney from the Whitney & Company store in Kirtland. This was the place that Joe moved into when he made camp in Kirtland. Joe had lived with Freddie Willie for a couple weeks, but, after that, he and the then-pregnant Emma lived in the apartment above the Whitney & Company store. During this time, Newell and his wife, Elizabeth Ann, were so hospitable to Joseph and Emma that Joe cordially referred to her as Mother Whitney. Beyond that, we just extended the nicknames to include Newell Whitney as Father Whitney. So we had Father and Mother Whitney. Now, all right, not to take too large of a diversion again, but I have to admit that I'm wrong. I said that the little 12-year-old Mary Rollins was the first woman to enter our timeline that would be one of Joe's plural wives. Well, chronologically speaking, that's wrong again, but only by a little tiny bit. So no, I'm not going to claim any more absolutes. I just hate claiming something and then being completely wrong with it. Because when Joe and Emma moved into the Whitney store, little 6-year-old Sarah Ann would eventually become one of Joe's wives as well. Joe met her in super early 1831, like February, when she was 6 and he was 25. And it was, maybe a month before he met Mary Rollins. So, I mean, it's so hard to understand which one of these women he met first and, how they all intertwine into the timeline here. I mean, it's amazing how stitched into the Mormon history polygamy is. I mean, I have missed so many of Joe's to-be plural lives and skipped mentioning them, and we're only 2 years into the church being officially established in our timeline. It's just absurd. So, that's Sarah Ann Whitney. We'll keep an eye on her. She was 6 when her and Joe met, and he was 25, so, it's not creepy at all. But let's go back to the timeline here. With the Whitney store in Kirtland, Father Whitney had a business partner by the name of Algernon Sidney Gilbert, which I mentioned a couple times here. And these are the guys that took that $300 from Dibble Dabble to buy the printing press and the typeset and all that stuff in New York. So Algernon Sidney Gilbert was actually the uncle of Mary Rollins that we talked about a little while ago, which is how she came to be connected with Mormonism and Joe in the first place. So Algernon Sidney Gilbert will be with us in our timeline for quite some time, and it's worth providing a useful nickname for him. Oftentimes, he's referred to as just Sidney Gilbert or A. Sidney Gilbert, which can be awfully confusing with Sidney Rigdon. I must tell you right off that he won't be with us for all that long. I won't divulge anymore, but there isn't a whole lot of information about this guy in Mormon history. Not much that's unique that could be easily made a snarky name with. So we'll just call Algernon Sidney Gilbert Acid Gilbert. It's a lot easier. That way we eliminate Sidney Gilbert and we don't confuse him with Sidney Rigdon. So Acid Gilbert for Algernon Sidney Gilbert. So Father Whitney and Acid Gilbert went on their mission trip funded by Dibble Dabble to purchase everything necessary for printing the church's own private propaganda, overseen by Joe Ollie Doubled Up Phelps and John Goebbels Whitmer. Another person we need to introduce into our timeline that's a bit overdue is a man named Isaac Morley. Morley was a wealthy man that was practicing the law of common stock under Hingepin Rigdon in Kirtland before Joe and company came along. Now, this is when we talked about earlier when it talked about going to live with the Whitmers. The Whitmers were actually living on the Morley farm at the time. Now, I know that it seems a little contradictory to say that Isaac Morley was a wealthy man that was practicing common stock, because the very implication of common stock is no rich and no wealthy and no poor, of course. Well, Morley had a large farm with a lot of land about a mile from the center of Kirtland. Now, from what I can tell, there were 4 or 5 families living on this farm in common housing, working the land for the benefit of the common stock storehouse in Kirtland. Now, where Morley's wealth comes into play is when you realize that all of these people were working his land, living on his property in houses that were probably erected at no cost to Morley by parishioners of Rigdon's Campbellite Church. And all of this implies that Morley was the wealthy landowner and that the people that worked his land were mere peasants, or you might want to call them indentured servants, working ignorantly for the good of the community. And that's the failing of communism in this respect. There's always a have controlling some have-nots, even if the very idea of communism implies no personal wealth and tries to eliminate the haves and have-nots. There's just no way of getting rid of it. So luckily for us, Isaac Morley, gives himself a nickname sufficient for our purposes in our timeline. During the Nauvoo years, Morley was good at making settlements, and he was tasked with creating his own commune near Lima, Illinois. Maybe it's Lima? I don't know. Yeah, Lima, Illinois. This commune came to be known as Yellrum. And yes, Yellrum is Morley backwards. Clever, isn't he? So Isaac Morley just gave us the perfect palindromatic nickname for our timeline, meaning he will be known forever as Yellrum Morley. In case you wanted to be a little creeped out, a piece of Yellrum Morley's garments are framed in the Manti, Utah temple because he was one of the founding guys of Manti and other settlements in current-day Sanpete County, Utah. So, yeah. They have a little chunk of his underwear in the temple. It's just so weird. All right. You got all of our new characters straight? We introduced 2 new women that would later become wives of Joseph, whose names were Mary Rollins and Sarah Ann Whitney. We also picked up Acid Gilbert and Yellrum Morley. Father Whitney and Acid Gilbert were business partners, and Mary Rollins was the niece of Acid Gilbert, and she was given her own copy of the Book of Mormon by Yellrum Morley. You see why those people were all necessary to introduce for this little tiny segment of the timeline? It's all a matter of the small details building the overall narrative. And, maybe the nicknames were a little confusing there, but I think it'll help in the long run. So Acid and Father Whitney took this $300 to New York for a few months, purchased all the stuff that they needed, and all that stuff would make its way to Independence by 1832. The lot had been purchased by Dibble Dabble in Independence, and it was merely in need of the printing press the building would house and the paper to print the stuff on. The paper became Joe's personal mission. Now, see, Double Dub Phelps was overseeing the installation of the printing press in Independence and had subsequently moved into the building that the press would be in. Double Dub will soon be the main guy who was writing and editing and typesetting, and he was printing content for the church. And, by June 1832, the Book of Commandments, the Evening and Morning Star, and a proprietary hymn book were all being printed by Double Dub in Independence. So he really, really got the work started once that printing press got powered up and running. In order to print all of this stuff, there needed to be a massive amount of paper. I mean, it was actually pretty expensive back then too. So on April 4th, 1832, Joe and a few others head to Wheeling, Virginia on their way towards Independence to buy paper. The initial plan was to print the hymn book and 10,000 copies of the Book of Commandments. Now, once Joe realized how expensive paper was, he lowered that 10,000 number down to 3,000 copies of the Book of Commandments, and he designated that the physical size needed to be very, very, very small. Now, I have a facsimile copy of the Book of Commandments, which is the same size and everything as the original, and my cell phone is sitting on top of it right now on my desk, and my cell phone is actually bigger than the Book of Commandments. I mean, it's pocket size. So with the paper saved in printing these pocket-sized Book of Commandments, Joe was able to oversee the production of the Evening and Morning Star, which was the newspaper where current events were covered and new and updated revelations were distributed frequently, and all kinds of, just news topics were covered and things were going on. So we've talked a lot about money on this show. I know you probably hate me bringing it up because money was, is such a central focus for Joe, and he would not stop talking about it, so we have to talk about what Joe talked about. I mean, Joe had gone from a very thrifty and extremely deprived upbringing, resource scarce with his huge family and very limited money and resources and food. And by the time Joe got to the Kirtland years, he had people simply handing him money just because he claimed to be a prophet and printed the Book of Mormon. Now, last episode, we talked about the last revelation contained in the Book of Commandments before it went to print, and that was the law of tithing. Now, Joe couldn't build a sustainable life with only strictly donations based on the goodness of people's hearts, so he had to set out a law that would ensure the money coming in. Now, of course, according to the Revelation, violation of this law resulted in being burned, which is why a lot of Mormons refer to their tithing laughably as fire insurance. Isn't it so funny? Ha ha. If you don't pay your tithing, you're gonna get burned. It's just amazing. So once this law was put into place, a bunch of money started coming in, and Joe couldn't be responsible, or he just wasn't responsible enough for pocketing all of it without anybody to advise him about expenses, without having some sort of way of tracking where all the money was needing to go. Now, throughout the history of the church, Joe has a pretty poor record of money management. And it wasn't just with the Kirtland Safety Society falling apart in 1838. There were occasional firms or organizations created to help curb that management, but oftentimes they just fell apart. The first of these, established just after the law of tithing was established, was called the United Order, or the United Order of Enoch, because Joe was calling himself Enoch at this time. This was the first real practice of the law of consecration. Once the law of tithing was instated and the United Order was created, the organization necessary for having the law of consecration was in place. Now, Joe had revealed said law of consecration right after he called Eddie Partyboy Partridge to be the first bishop of the church, meaning he was responsible for the supplies in the bishop's storehouse. The law of consecration had been established, which called the parishioners of the church to promise their life and possessions to the church, and it's still practiced in temple ceremonies today. It's no longer the communistic law that it initially attempted to be. Instead, the church today just requires tithing and the time and talent donations in the form of church callings to hopefully satisfy this everlasting gospel of the law of consecration. So anyway, Joe needed a governing body to properly appropriate the funds that were coming in with the new law of tithing and the law of consecration, and that's where the United Order comes in. According to a fair amount of revelations contained in the Doctrine and Covenants, it was absolutely necessary for people to join the United Order. And, consecrating all of their possessions to the church. We have Doctrine and Covenants 70, 77, 81, 101, and a few others that are very, very explicit in their description that anybody that does not join the United Order or follow the law of consecration, giving all of their time and talents and energy and possessions to the church, those people will burn or be cut off or become apostates or whatever. It differs in all of them. Now, the idea of communal living was very strong with Joe, and he wouldn't rest until something like it was instated, and membership in it was required. Now, I should point out that by 1833, the United Order was financially insolvent and was later dissolved, but we'll get into that when it happens in the timeline. So, moving on from the United Order and everything else we've been talking about today, to introduce our next event in the timeline, I'm going to read a letter. I believe I've referenced this letter in the past or maybe read some excerpts, but now I'm going to read the letter in its entirety. It was written by a man living in Logan, Utah named Aaron DeWitt in 1875. He wrote it to his sister, and it was found in a time capsule that was sealed in 1889 and reopened in the 1980s. Now, just a heads up, the one main topic this letter introduces is what we'll be covering for the rest of the episode. I know you're probably looking at the ticker on your podcast app right now and wondering how the hell one single topic can take so long to cover, but I promise it's worth every minute we can possibly devote to it. As we progress through the letter, I'll explain each thing that it's referring to. And I do have to say, in order to find this letter, it used to be linked on saintsalive.com, but that website was purchased and the URL is no longer good. And I had to search for hours to find this letter in its entirety. So I will include the whole thing in the show notes just for future reference. If anybody does want to find this letter and, reference it later, this is going to be one place that it's easy to find really quick right off the bat. Quote, Logan, Utah, January 31st, 1875. To Mrs. Elizabeth Durant. My dear sister, how to commence this letter I have promised you so long? I hardly know, but will say in the first place, I have been deceived, led into error, imposed upon, deluded, beguiled into a false religion in my youth, and spent the best part of my life in a wilderness, a desert, a land of sage and salt, away from all enlightenment and civilization, among the most degraded tribes of Indians in the Western Hemisphere. And what is still worse, I have had to mingle with a beastly, black-hearted, bloody priesthood, a set of treacherous villains, as full of meanness as old Satan, and as thirsty for blood as a stinted leech. That was just the introductory paragraph, and I do have to say here, Aaron DeWitt is a little bit of a poet, so he includes little 4-line stanzas throughout his letter here, and we'll read those as they go because they really capture his true feelings for what's going on in Utah here. He goes on, while these are facts, they are not half told. For hundreds have been killed for gold. Both men and women have been slain and robbed to add to Brigham's gain. There you go. That's what we're talking about today. Brigham. I will here mention a few of the most inhuman and cruel acts ever committed by any man-eating savage in the darkest ages, and which none but a corrupt priesthood could ever perpetrate it. All of these have been done in Utah since I came here by men claiming to hold the holy priesthood of the Son of God, and sent by their great prophet and leader to do these deeds of blood and plunder in the name of God Almighty. On the 12th day of September 1857, 2 days after I arrived in this accursed land, 119 men, women, and children were murdered while traveling to California by a band of Mormons painted as Indians and led by a Mormon high priest, a pious president of a stake of Zion, and a wise ward bishop. Of course, what Aaron is referring to here is the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Now, I haven't covered the massacre on this show at all. I don't think I've even referenced it much. If you want to hear that, go to Scathing Atheist. There's 2 episodes back. I think like one episode, or episode 126 and 127 or something, or maybe 125, 126. I'm just doing this off the top of my head. Noah and I talked about the Mountain Meadows Massacre, and I brought in a whole bunch of quotes from people that were there, and it was just, it's a really horrible, disgusting, brutal occurrence that, it was a 5-day siege where they had 120 people locked in this Mountain Meadows area that's just just east of Cedar City, Utah, and it's just disgusting. It's absolutely offensive and horrible to read what happened, to understand what happened with the Mountain Meadows Massacre. So that's what Aaron is talking about right now in his letter. After the immigrants had defended themselves against those wretches for 3 days beneath a burning sun in a sandy desert, without a drop of water, they dressed 2 beautiful girls in white and sent them to a spring nearby. But as they tripped along towards the sparkling stream, they met the bullets of those merciless Mormons and fell dead into the water they were trying to secure to save their own lives and quench the parched throats of their beloved parents. So what he's talking about there is, so this siege happened for 5 days straight, and these people didn't have any access to food or water. They were just in a big open field, and they had circled their wagons around in a defensive formation and dug trenches to, in the circle inside the wagons to hopefully defend themselves against the siege. Well, They didn't have any food. They didn't have water. They didn't have anything. They were cut off from the freshwater spring they were using for their water. And I mean, no little rabbits or anything were going to come along and, come into the circle where these guns were being fired all the time. So, of course they were getting starved. I think the Mormons might have just hoped that they would all eventually just die from thirst or something. But I mean, yeah, that's what happened. For 5 days straight, they deprived these people of water. It's just horrible. So horrible. Let's see here. Quote, finally, John D. Lee, a Mormon bishop who had been anointed a king and priest to God, who had 18 wives given to him for being so great and good, sent a flag of truce to the poor, parched up bleeding immigrants, and promised them protection if they would give up their arms and go back to the nearest town. This they gladly agreed to. But mark the next act of this sanctified saint. Okay, so what he's talking about there is when it came time after this 5 days of sieging, this a business week of sieging happened. John D. Lee came up to these people flying a flag of surrender and said, "Hey, if you guys will just give us your guns, then we'll escort you to Cedar City, and we'll protect you from these dirty savages that are sieging you, that are trying to kill you right now." And the people agreed, and they gave up their guns and their weapons. And, let's hear what happens next. They had not gone half a mile from their camp when this great deliverer gave the command to his men to fire, and every man was shot down, and every woman screamed and ran. The terrible, sorrowful scene that ensued, no tongue can tell. Every woman was caught and ravished, murdered, robbed of her jewelry, stripped naked, and left unburied on the burning sand. In a few days, nothing was left of all those beautiful forms but the bleaching bones the prairie wolf could not devour. And then every child those bloodhounds thought could tell the tale of their infernal villainy was beheaded or cut to pieces and scattered quivering with its bleeding friends. Then those pure-souled priests plunged their hands into the gory, clotted blood of their victims, and with outstretched arms toward heaven expressed their gratitude to God for so great a favor, to him who doeth all things well, but who will undoubtedly, when they meet him, hear his laugh re-echo through the caverns of the damned, saying, "I told you I would laugh at your calamity and mock when your fear cometh." Oh my God. It's so fucked up. So what he's telling about here with the Mountain Meadows Massacre, all of the women were caught and ravaged and, murdered and robbed of all of their possessions. And then, all of the children who were alive that were old enough to tell tales, they were all beheaded or killed. And everything that he's telling us, it's multiply attested. Everything, you might think, oh, well, he's just editorializing. No, all of this there's multiple first-hand accounts of this exact thing happening, everything that he talks about. But when he does go, I think he takes a little bit of artistic liberty when he says those pure-souled priests plunge their hands into the gory, clotted blood of their victims and with outstretched arms towards heaven express their gratitude to God. I think he's taking a little bit of artistic liberty there. But I don't think that the men actually went to an open chest cavity of somebody and bathed or cleansed their hands in their blood and then gave gratitude to God. That's just a little too sinister. I'm not quite on board with that. But everything else that he described up to that point is accurate. It is completely accurate, and we have multiple accounts of it happening. So, fuck the Mountain Meadows Massacre. That is twisted stuff. All right, next he goes on. All the property of those murdered men and women was gathered together, the value of $115,000, besides $35,000 in gold, and sent to their old master murderer Brigham. And this is how he sits in his office, wags his big toe and makes his means, and then boasts that he is the greatest financier on earth, and owns nothing but what the Lord has given him. All right, I got to take a little issue with that because yes, Brigham, or all of the possessions that the Fancher party had were gathered together, and Brigham did absorb them into the church. There's accounts of people seeing their property in the possession of the Mormons after long after the Fancher party was gone. And he also billed this part isn't included in this letter, but Brigham also billed the United States government for the value of everything that they had lost, the Fancher party had lost, and the government paid half of what it was. Now, $115,000 and $35,000 in gold, those are wildly inaccurate. It was a little bit closer to the tune of $2,500 that the government paid out of a $5,000 bill, but I mean, we do have the itemized list for what he billed the government for the missing property, as, Brigham was director of Indian affairs, and he had, legal authority to do this exact thing when people would, when people get robbed by the Indians or whatever, or they would be sieged by them, whatever, the government would issue money to whoever was, harmed or damaged, hopefully as, some kind of like an insurance policy against the Native Americans. And that's what Brigham Young did, and he was rightfully within his authority to do so. Doesn't mean that it's not fucked up that he did it, but I mean, he was still within his authority. All right, he continues on here. Aaron continues. Another and similar case is that of the murdered Morrisites, a religious body of simple-minded souls who had met together for devotional exercise in a small valley on the banks of the Weber River in the summer of 1862, when a corps of Nauvoo Legion, led by cowardly Captain Burton, who is now on a mission preaching the gospel of mercy to you dark, benighted Brightons, and inviting you to the home of the free and the land of the brave, but he is not gallant enough to come home himself. He is the dastardly dog who crawled on his belly like the ancient progenitor which tempted Mother Eve, until he was near enough to fire a cannon and blow down the door where those poor souls had met. Okay, so what they're talking about now is the Morrisite War. So there was a small contingency of people that were apostates that were against the church. They didn't follow Brigham Young, but they believed in the Book of Mormon and whatnot. And they got this little meeting house together on the banks of the Weber River, and they met there for a while, and then eventually it all came to a head, and this Captain Burton guy under the command of Brigham Young, basically he sieged the fort that these Morrisites were meeting in, and eventually after a few days of sieging, he wheeled up his two cannons to the front door of this fort that they were in. And the fort, it wasn't like a walled off fort. It was just like a small building. He wheeled up the cannons to it and blew it down and killed 4 people at the same time. And it was just a mess, an absolute and utter mess. And it's a black spot on Mormon history that not a lot of people know about. So please do some research. Look at the Morrisite War. We'll cover it when the storyline gets into the Utah years, because it's really, really twisted. Let's see. DeWitt continues here. Then, after they had surrendered and given up their few firearms, the Paltroons shot and killed Joseph Morris, Mr. Banks, and 2 women, one with a beautiful baby nursing at her breast. Took the rest of the camp prisoners, put them in a penitentiary, and finally fined them $100 each, just because they did not believe in the rascality of Brigham Young, and do as they were told. All right, he goes into another little 4-line stanza here. What bloody deeds, what sin and strife, what sacrifice of human life, what deeds of plunder have been done to raise a gory throne for Young. I will next mention the most perfidious act coupled with the foulest murder ever committed since the world began. It was in the dead of night, when 3 of the Salt Lake City police were sent by the great seer and revelator of all the world to see Dr. Robinson and ask him to set a broken limb for a poor man who, they said, was writhing in agony. The doctor had just retired to bed, but at his murderer's entreaties he dressed himself and in a few moments was on an errand of mercy. He was not gone far when one of the villains who walked up behind struck him in the head with a meat chopper he had stolen for that purpose and cleft open his skull. The others fired their pistols immediately and, blowing out their victims' brains, fled. That's so messed up. So this is messed up. Okay. So these two guys under the command of Brigham Young supposedly went to this guy named Dr. Robinson, and they said, there's a guy who broke his arm. Can you please set it? The guy was like, no, it's too late at night. And they're like, please, he's writhing in agony. It really sucks. The doctor's like, okay, fine. And he got dressed. And then as he was walking out, and they were walking down the street or whatever, one of these guys who had stolen a meat chopper struck him in the head, which probably didn't kill him, but just, stunned him, and, it probably caused a fair amount of brain damage, and he was probably in bad shape. And then these guys pulled out their pistols and just point blank shot him in the head and killed him, and then ran away. It's good old West. Isn't it beautiful? Good God. All right, here. DeWitt continues. But my soul sickens at these dreadful deeds. Or I would tell you of the brutal murder of Yates, the killing of McNeil. Okay, he's going to go on a tirade here. I hope you're ready. The assassination of Borman, the shooting of Brassfield, the slaughter of the Atkins party, the emasculation of Jones. What? And finally, the butchering of him and his poor old mother. I would also mention the dead men in the meat market, the 3 men in the barn, the murder near the Warm Springs, the shooting of Pike in the streets of Salt Lake City in broad daylight, the murder of the Potters and Parishes, of Rhodes and Roberts, and hundreds of others who have been murdered in cold blood and robbed to satisfy the avaricious cravings of as foul a man and as false a prophet as ever disgraced this sin-stained earth. Whew. Good God, that is so horrible. So DeWitt is claiming that all of these people were just slaughtered at the command of Brigham Young. Whew. I mean, Brigham Young probably didn't do much of it himself because, he's smart. He was a delegator. He didn't do stuff himself. He commanded people to do stuff, but Jesus Christ, this is... all of those people? I can't wait till the Utah years. I cannot wait. All right, DeWitt continues. These horrible deeds have all been committed in our holy Zion, and not one of the perpetrators ever brought to justice. It was the Wild West. No, Brigham was he commanded it all. Nobody was going to go to jail for any of this shit. In fact, there has been no justice in the land. A few years ago, a man's life was not worth a cent who durst utter such words as there is evil in the land or sin among the priesthood. You do as you are told has been the gospel preached in this priest-ridden place for the last quarter of a century. In the fall of 1857, I heard our prophet in a congregation of 3,000 souls tell his bishops they were to counsel the brethren to do as they were told. And said he, this is supposedly quoting Brigham Young, if they don't do it, lay righteousness to the line and judgment to the plummet. If you don't know what that is, come to me and I will tell you. He then threw back his head and with a revolting grin drew his finger across his throat, a sign the anointed ones well understood. And yet the old bilk with his smooth slaying will make his innocent dupes believe he is free from guilt, and that he is the light, the truth, and the way, and that he has a place prepared for them when the waters are flowing placidly in a land of milk and honey. All right. So here he's talking about a sermon that Brigham Young was giving in 1857, which I'm sure it's in the Journal of Discourses. He said that he'll lay righteousness to the line and judge to the plummet, and then he threw his head back and used his thumb to draw a cutting motion from one ear under the throat to the other ear, which was a sign of the temple of blood atonement, which is, if you tell any of what's going on in here, then you'll get your throat cut open, which, a bastardized version of this is still in the Today version of the temple ceremonies, and it's Masonic, and it's weird, and it's creepy and fucked up, and it's death cultish. Anyway, so that's what happened there, and, maybe we'll eventually get to that talk that Brigham Young was giving about that. Let's see, DeWitt continues here and starts off, or the next part in DeWitt's letter is one of those stanzas. But the waters are stained with blood, and the milk is turned to whey, and the honey has lost its sweetness, the people seem to say, and dupes are getting scarcer, and obedience is dead, and all the old man's judgments and plummets too have fled. Then there was the Hencart Company that crossed the plains in 1856. Oh, this is going to be messed up. The details of their distress caps the climax of all horrors. Of course, he's talking about the Donner Reed party here. Could I portray that terrible journey and the sufferings of those poor souls, your very heart would bleed. 3 ounces of flour per day was all they had to eat. Upon this scanty fare, they dragged their carts with 100 pounds of luggage over the worst kind of road, and more than 500 miles through snow, fording rivers whose currents are the swiftest kind, and their waters always cold. Then at night, when those poor, wet, shivering souls came into camp, they had no wood to make a fire. At times a few small willows could be obtained, just enough to bake their scanty cake. It did not take them long to eat their supper, for a mouthful each was all they had. So hungry were they, that some gnawed the flesh off their own arms, ate roasted hide, or fed upon their shoes. 1/4 of all who started died of starvation on the way. From 5 to 15 died every night for over 300 miles of the road. So weak and weary were these living skeletons that they could scarcely bury their dead. Every night a pit would be dug just large enough to place the dead in, and a shallow covering of dirt thrown over them. Those that dug the grave one night expected to be placed in theirs the next. Many a one prayed that his spirit might leave his frame of bones for a berth among the blessed. The Donner Reed party is some really, really twisted piece of American history. And we'll get into that eventually, but everything that he's talking about there, that all happened to, they were resorting to cannibalism. The bodies that they didn't have the energy to bury, they were just eating. They were eating their shoes, they were eating leather, they were eating anything because they were so viciously starved. And it's because they started too late in their journey. They started their pioneer journey too late in the year. They started in August instead of, June or May or June or July, like other wagon trains started. And the snow just hit them way too early, and it completely fucked them. They were so destroyed by General Winter here. So Aaron DeWitt continues here. Why did they start in this way, do you inquire? Because this false prophet had told them that it was the Lord's plan of immigration and the only way to secure salvation. They, believing him to be a true prophet, had faith in all he said, and started on their journey 1,400 miles, as late in the season as August. As they traveled on westward toward Zion of their hopes, songs could be heard from every cart and prayers from every camp. But before they got 500 miles on their weary pilgrimage, the snows began to fall, the wintry winds to blow, and the keen frost and piercing cold set in. Then their suffering commenced in earnest. Still they trudged along day after day, full of faith in God and holy priesthood, and day after day endured greater pain. Finally, their limbs began to freeze, and pieces fell from their worn-out bodies. They became dispirited, and pined away and died, as I have already told you. Whew, all right, this is messed up. He goes into another little stanza here. So sad and sickening is this gospel plan as taught by Brigham to poor fallen man, that every time I mention his ill name, it sends a shudder quivering through my frame. I also tremble for the deeds he's done, for life destroyed, for blood he's caused to run, for victims frozen on the plains through him, while starving, suffering, falling limb from limb. Ooh, yeah, very well encapsulated, very well said. Let's finish out this letter, because goddamn, it's taxing. Dear sister, in this sad letter I have told you the truth, as it is in Jesus Christ, and as I expect to meet at the final bar of retribution. All these deeds and 1,000 others equal to them in baseness and brutality have all been committed under the cloak of religion, but I must tell you more of them at another time. I will now tell you the reason why we could not leave this blood-stained land. 10 or 12 years ago. In the first place, we were 1,000 miles from the nearest town east, 800 miles to the nearest town west, and God only knows how far to any place north and south. On all this vast tract of land, no white man dwelt. No civilization was known. None but the red man roamed the dreary solitudes. To travel such a space required considerable food, a good wagon and team, in fact, everything necessary for a 3 months pilgrimage. Nor was it safe for a few men to go together unless they were well armed. Again, every bishop knew your business and was always on the lookout. If you started, they would send men to drive off your stock, and thus you would be compelled to return. Then, if you did not behave and act the hypocrite, the bishop would send the Danites to use you up, send you across lots to that bright brimstone home we read about. Thus, you see, it was almost impossible to get away. But now we have a railroad across the plains and settlements every little way, and civilization is coming to Zion. If the Lord won't come, the law will, and if Jesus is not approaching, justice is. Then all who want can leave, but now the priests want us to go, and we wish to stay. Burst off every fetter, remove this priestly yoke, and never rest contented till every link is broke. For every man in Utah and every woman shall be free. And shouts shall echo through the land for God and liberty, hoping to meet you soon on earth life, and finally beyond the confines of time, measured out to mortal man. I am affectionately your brother, Aaron DeWitt. End quote. Whew. Thanks for hanging in there for the entirety of that letter. It's an absolute beast. But it was a great way to introduce Brigham. And, before we talk about bloody fucking Brigham himself, we need to qualify that letter. I said at the beginning it was sealed in a time capsule and it was reopened a century later. Aaron DeWitt was an apostate that had left the church, and therefore everything he wrote is considered anti-Mormon propaganda bullshit. But is it really? In studying the various historical claims that he made, he was fairly accurate. When it came to the Mountain Meadows Massacre, he was spot on with everything but the date and, possibly the the blood bathing at the end. That was kind of weird, but I don't know. When he talked about the Morrisite War, everything that he talked about there was accurate from what I could find. When he talked about the Donner Reed Party, all of that was accurate. He left out a lot of details that are even more disturbing than what he was talking about there. He may have had a slant against the church, which came through quite clearly in his letter, but let's be honest. When historians look at this letter, primarily believing members, they just see an apostate with an axe to grind that was on a campaign to smear the leadership of the church that he had just left. Now, a lot of people consider Brigham Young to be the holy and pious prophet of the Utah Mormon Church that God called him to be, and this view of him comes into direct contradiction to a lot of contemporary accounts of him. From a lot of other historically sound references, we can tell that this letter enlightens us a lot more about the character of Brigham Young than the sanitized version that the church teaches about him. We also know that a lot of the historical occurrences claimed in the letter aren't usually attributed to Young, but rather to his followers acting on their own accord. At least that's how it's claimed anyway. I mean, the Mountain Meadows Massacre is a great example of this. People have claimed for a long time that Young had no idea what was happening when it did happen, and the man responsible, John Lee, was executed for his evil initiative. But I mean, that doesn't really explain why all of the possessions of the Fancher Party were absorbed by the church, and the U.S. government was subsequently billed for said property. In contrast, it's merely theorized that Young knew about the Mountain Meadows Massacre, or even worse, commanded it to happen. But there isn't smoking gun evidence of his connection to it. I mean, DeWitt in his letter merely drew a line between two dots that seemed like they needed a line between them, and I can't imagine that his reporting of the Mountain Meadows Massacre is any different from anything else that he reported. DeWitt was fairly accurate, and the account that we read from the believing Mormon perspective of who Brigham Young was is just lackluster. It's completely lacking in the historical veracity and the actual things that were going on. So all of that being said, a lot of people look at this letter and consider it nothing but hogwash, and they completely ignore it. And I think that's very intellectually disingenuous. Well, almost as disingenuous as taking everything DeWitt said as absolute truth. I mean, there's a balance in between those perspectives that we need to find to get as close to the facts as possible. Now, it's quite obvious from some of the content in that letter that DeWitt really hated Brigham Young. Even his little rhymes were really slanted against Young, and I can't really fault him. It was a well-known rumor that if somebody left the LDS Church in the Utah Territory, they were probably not going to be around for much longer. There were a few apostates that lived in Utah during the mid to late 1800s, but almost every single person that lived in Utah had made the pilgrimage as a Mormon. But let's use historical empathy for a minute. Let's step into the shoes of Aaron DeWitt. He had made the trek all the way to Utah, across the plains, 1,400 miles in 1859, and based on everything that had happened, 1857, he understood that Mormonism was a false religion, and it was led by a, quote, beastly, black-hearted, bloody priesthood, end quote. I mean, like almost every Mormon that made the trip across the plains, DeWitt was sold a good-looking package that had afterlife insurance attached, and when these people arrived and found Utah to be the desolate, uninhabitable wasteland desert that it is, they were obviously a little frustrated with the bait and switch that they'd experienced. But I would just ask, what was their solution? I mean, really, like DeWitt said, there wasn't any civilization 1,000 miles to the east and 800 miles to the west, and nothing north or south for at least that far. Where were these people supposed to go once they realized that Utah was nothing more than a broken promise? Think about being DeWitt in this situation. He was stuck in BFE Logan, Utah after traveling on foot 1,400 miles to live in a resource-scarce desert, all perpetrated by a man that movie villains pale in comparison to. DeWitt was surrounded by people that hated him for his apostasy with no alternate circumstance to flee to. Would we expect something written by a person in this circumstance to be anything but hate-filled? I mean, everything that DeWitt claimed we'll get into once the timeline advances to the Utah years starting in 1847, and we'll judge the historical accuracy of his claims as we encounter each circumstance. For now, let's dive into the bloody motherfucker that was Bloody Brigham Young. Now, I'm willing to wager there are a lot of things about Brigham Young that most Mormons don't know about. I'm just going to say this at the onset of our introduction to Brigham Young. The church wouldn't continue to have 4 universities named after this man if they knew everything about him and what he did. If the majority of believing Mormons today, especially in leadership positions, were to really understand Young, I think they would try to distance themselves from him as much as possible. I mean, he's a horrible human being. A lot of the things in Joseph Smith's history have been whitewashed or ignored by the church as a whole, but the focus is on Joseph because he was the founding prophet of the church. And Brigham Young's history is altogether forgotten by almost every single believer in Mormonism, and that's simply a crying shame. I can't stand idly by and let people believe nonsense about Bloody Brigham without some real knowledge of who he truly was. On April 14th, 1832, 10 days after Joe left for Virginia to buy paper for Double Dub Phelps' printing press, Brigham Young was baptized by Eleazar Miller after getting a Book of Mormon a year and a half earlier from his brother Phineas Young. Brigham's brothers, Phineas, Joseph, and John, all converted soon after him and began serving missions just like Brigham. This occurrence, Brigham joining the church, would shape the history of Mormonism forever into what we see today. Now, we already know Brigham got the nickname of Bloody Brigham because of some of the occurrences that were described to us by Aaron DeWitt in his letter, but we need to really understand this guy. I'm going to read a series of quotes straight from the mouth of this cutthroat entrepreneur so we can get a grip on who Bloody Brigham really was. Maybe try to get into his mind a little bit, if it isn't too dirty in there. The various quotes that I found are going to be organized in a few categories. First is polygamy, because, he was a womanizing fiend that loved being surrounded by women. Now, just a quick note on polygynous practices in the church. They were practiced similar to the biblical style. People were sealed to each other for time or for time and all eternity. That was the distinction between the two. A lot of Joseph's wives were sealed to him for time and all eternity, meaning they would rise to the celestial kingdom as his wife. However, there were plenty of women that were sealed to some men for just time, not time and all eternity. A lot of women that were sealed to Joe for time and all eternity were subsequently sealed to Bloody Brigham for time after Joe's death. Now, I'm trying to make this a little bit more clear. When the church doctrine on sealing and polygamy came along around the same time, a lot of women considered it a great honor to be sealed to the prophet for time and all eternity, while they were just sealed to their earthly husbands for time. Time just meant while they were living on earth. And as soon as that woman died, she would fall into Joe's harem, because she was sealed to him for time and all eternity. That's only if he decided to call her through the veil, of course. That's how Joe was able to marry so many women that were actually already married to other men. Double digits worth of these women. Because those women were only married to their actual husbands, or sealed to them for time, whereas they were sealed to Joseph for time and all eternity. It's confusing, I know, but the practice of sealing wasn't necessarily biblical in and of itself, even though it followed from the claim made in Matthew 18:18 that says, quote, "Verily I say unto you, whatsoever ye shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever ye shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven," end quote. So Joe figured he would bind or seal people to each other so their marriage would span eternity. That's where time and all eternity comes in, as opposed to just time. Now, the idea behind it is to bind everybody together as one big eternal family in the celestial kingdom. Now, this isn't very well known, but Joseph even had other men sealed to him in temple ceremonies. Yeah, I know that's kind of weird to think about, but polygamy is merely the worldly term used for the sealing temple ceremony, but it included men as well, and that was specifically called the law of adoption. Now, I know you're dying to hear some Brigham Young quotes, but I couldn't remember the law of adoption, and when I was searching for it, I found some very interesting quotes that have been recognized and brought to the light by D. Michael Quinn. Now, Quinn was arguably a believing member of the church, and also one of its foremost historians. Quinn is also gay. Now, trust me, that's something that would never, ever bear mentioning in the podcast ever. And it's not something that I ever talk about because people's sexuality is completely irrelevant to who they are as a person and what they do. And especially if they're like a historian or something, I should be referring to Quinn's work specifically itself. But his sexuality does come into play here for just briefly. I have finally figured out how Quinn could consider himself a believing member prior to 1988 when he resigned, even though the church's stance on homosexuality was much less than favorable, and, still is, and it has been for a long time. According to some research that Quinn has done, a little fooling around with somebody of the same sex was never as taboo in the 19th century as it is now. Quinn makes the argument that some men fooled around with each other, possibly including Joe himself, and this might be where the idea for the law of adoption came into play in 1843. I'm going to take a small excerpt from Dialogue, a Journal in Mormon Thought, where it cites Quinn's work on same-sex relations in the Nauvoo and early Salt Lake City era, titled Same-Sex Dynamics Among 19th Century Americans. I'll leave a link to the book in the show notes, and this is taken from page 110 of it. Now, just to clarify, I'm not familiar enough with Quinn's work itself to infer if he was making connections that Joe practiced any homosexuality himself or not. But given some of the quotes that are in this book, a Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought, that cites D. Michael Quinn's work, it's kind of easy to surmise that that's what it's talking about. So I just have to throw that out there. I'm not familiar enough with Quinn's work to know this for certain, but this is what it seems like to me in just a little bit of studying. Anyway, this book says, quote, like American culture of the time, 19th century Mormonism encouraged various levels of same-gender intimacy, which most Mormons experienced without erotic response. In the 19th century, it was acceptable for Mormon girls, boys, women, and men to walk arm in arm in public with those of the same gender. It was acceptable for same-sex couples to dance together at LDS church socials. School yearbooks pictured Mormon boys on high school athletic teams holding hands or resting one's hand on a teammate's bare thigh. It was also acceptable for Mormons to publicly or privately kiss those of the same sex full on the lips, and it was okay to acknowledge that they dreamed of doing so. End quote. And what I'm quoting from goes on to talk about a sermon that Joseph Smith gave regarding his very dear friend Lorenzo Barnes. Now, Barnes was on the mission trail in England and died while he was there. And this is what Joe said during his sermon mourning the loss of Brother Barnes. This is speaking in regards to bodies being buried near each other. And it kind of speaks to why Joe built a tomb in Nauvoo that was converted to a wine cellar by 1850. Quote, to bring it to the understanding, it would be upon the same principle as though two who were very friends indeed should lie down upon the same bed at night, locked in each other's embrace, talking of their love, and should awake in the morning together. They could immediately renew their conversation of love, even while rising from their bed. End quote. I know, crazy, right? I mean, like I said, given Quinn's sexual identity and his prior belief in the church, I can see how those two things aren't necessarily diametrically opposed. And like I said, I would never mention Quinn's sexuality here because it's absolutely irrelevant in every case but what we're talking about right here with the law of adoption and, Joseph being sealed to two other men. It's just interesting. Now, I have to admit, I only wish that I were a little bit more familiar with Quinn's work. So please don't think that I'm putting words into his mouth or scholarship into his name that he hasn't actually done, because that's not what I'm trying to do. This is just what I have found in a few hours of Googling and researching this topic. And like I said, there will be a link to the book in the show notes. I'd like for you guys to read it, read Quinn's work that he's put out himself, and see if anything that I'm talking about is actually based on foundation or if it's completely up in the night. Now, I'm just merely speculating. That's what I'm trying to get at. I'm merely speculating given what I've stumbled upon for this past couple hours of research about same-sex relations in Mormonism. And then I'm trying to, wrap my feeble little mind around how some people can believe in Mormonism. And in Quinn's case, even if they are violently against homosexuals, he was still able to do it. I mean, I would argue that was because Quinn knows more about church history and early 19th century relationship dynamics than the wrinkly, white, hate-filled homophobes that run the church. And more power to him. I think that's fantastic. All right, that was just a quick rabbit trail diversion that I had to chase there. And now it's over. So let's go back to talking about polygamy and Brigham Young and the distinction between time and all eternity, or just time. And we covered a little bit about the law of adoption now, and we can really talk about some Brigham Young quotes here. I've organized these quotes into a couple of categories, and polygamy is the first, like I said. And remember, while we're going through this portion of his quotes, Bloody Brigham had between 50 and 60 wives, verifiable, before he died, and I have no idea how many brothers he was sealed to through the law of adoption. Anyway. This is from Brigham Young, and all of these quotes are taken from the Journal of Discourses. Quote, Brother Cannon remarked that people wondered how many wives and children I had. I may inform them that I shall have wives and children by the million, and glory and riches and power and dominion, end quote. Are you starting to get a feel for who Brigham Young was? This is going to get exciting, all right? So given his track record, he didn't wait until his death for glory, riches, power, and dominion. But as far as the other part, having wives and, children by the million, he had documented wives by the tens and 46 documented surviving children at the time of his death in 1877. But of course, I know that he's implying what his planet is going to be like when he says by the million, after his death. But we don't have evidence about that, so I'm just talking about today. As far as Brigham Young's descendants go, I found a 1902 New York Times article that talked about an annual meetup that Brigham's descendants used to hold. In 1902, that article claimed that he had 204 grandchildren and 745 great-grandchildren, putting his documented direct descendants at over 1,000 people. Now, I'd really like to see some more modern research done on this topic, but I couldn't find any anywhere. I looked so hard. But using a simple population calculator at an average 0.012 growth rate, it looks like he has just shy of 3,900 descendants today. But those are just equations based on old documentation, just on this one New York Times article, basically. I would love to see a massive DNA sampling to find out just how many people swam from Brigham's greatly overworked genitals, but there's simply no way of conducting that study. So let's hear a few more quotes about polygamy from Bloody Brigham. If you want to find some official church documentation that the church is trying to distance themselves from, the Journal of Discourses 26 volumes are the paramount example of this. The church has been trying to ignore the Journal of Discourses for so long, and it just keeps coming back to bite him in the ass, and it's beautiful. This is from Brigham again, quote, "The only men who become gods are those who enter into polygamy," end quote. Yeah, there isn't really anything amazing there, although given the wording in Doctrine and Covenants 132, I pretty much agree with him. And it's something that every believing Mormon has to deal with today or reconcile somehow, because it states plainly that nobody can get to heaven or get to exaltation unless they have multiple wives. So, just throwing it out there. Let's see. Next one. Quote, "There is one thing in the sayings of Brother Babbitt which I will refer to, in relation to the loyalty of this people. I am at the defiance of the rulers of the greatest nation on the earth, with the United States all put together, to produce a more loyal people than the Latter-day Saints. Have they as a people broken any law? No, they have not. Have the United States? Yes. They have trampled the Constitution under their feet with impunity and ridden recklessly over all law to persecute and drive this people. Admit, for argument's sake, that the Mormon elders have more wives than one." Yeah, just for argument's sake. Yeah, of course. There's no, anyway. "Yet our enemies have never proved it." If I had 40 wives in the United States, they did not know it. and could not substantiate it. Neither did I ask any lawyer, judge, or magistrate for them. I live above the law, and so do this people. Do the laws of the United States require us to crouch and bow down to the miserable wretches who violate them? No. The broad law of the whole earth is that every person has a right to enjoy every mortal blessing so far as he does not infringe upon the rights and privileges of others. End quote. I didn't know that Bloody Brigham was such a libertarian. Did you know it? I love how he just lays that claim out bare for everybody to deal with. They, meaning the U.S. government, could not substantiate if I had 40 wives. He said, let's grant it for argument's sake. Oh, this is amazing. But honestly, this actually speaks to the bigger issue with him being like the theocratic king of Utah and the surrounding territories. Anytime that the U.S. government tried to enforce the law of monogamy, or for that matter, any laws, they couldn't without some sort of military intervention. Brigham had no problem flaunting most laws. probably just because he didn't give no fucks about those laws, and nobody would force him to follow them. The Salt Lake City Mormon Church, some might call it the Brighamite sect, never would have survived the way it did if Bloody Brigham were held to the standards of contemporary U.S. laws. We run into the same problem with polygamous communes today. Only today the law isn't enforced I don't have any fucking idea. People are stuck in polygamous communes all over the West, Mexico and Canada, and they're having undocumented children and wives, never having proper education, never getting real medical treatment, never breaking away from the constant physical and emotional abuse, and worst of all, they never have access to an alternative. It's so challenging to get statistics on polygamy. Even today, because it's so concealed, and we run into the same problem with Brigham. He claimed that nobody could prove that he had 40 wives at the time he gave this speech. We know of 55 very well documented wives Brigham had, and we know of 56 children from 16 of those wives, but those are only the relations that we have strong evidence to prove. There is truly no telling how many women Brigham Young had sexual relations with, and we will probably never know just how many children he had from women that weren't documented as his wives. He didn't follow the rules. That one thing is clear. Brigham didn't follow the rules, and marriage and child statistics work reliably if you follow the rules. But Brigham was all over the place without strong documentation and telling the rules to go fuck themselves, along with anybody that wanted to enforce those rules. He may very well have tens of thousands of descendants today that we don't know about. There's just simply no way of knowing. All right, the next quote really goes to show Brigham's attitude toward women in Utah. He was talking to an older man named Brother Thomas who was moping about how unattractive he was. This is Brigham's response, even though he was similarly aged to Brother Thomas when he said this. Quote, "He has told you that he was an old man," meaning Thomas. "Do you think I am an old man? I could prove to this congregation that I am young, for I could find more girls who would choose me for a husband than can any of the young men." End quote. Yeah. Well, that was it. Well, think about it. Was it really about being sealed celestially in holy reverence to these women? Or was it a little more primal than that? I'll just let that one speak for itself. That's enough polygamy quotes. The next section is going to be his quotes that are racist. Don't get me wrong, Joseph was racist, but Bloody Brigham turned that dial way, way up to 11. Quote, "Cain slew his brother, and the Lord put a mark upon him, which is the flat nose and black skin, and they never can hold the priesthood until all the other descendants of Adam have received the promises." End quote. Yeah, get at the back of the priesthood bus. It's just absurd. All right, I gotta be clear here. This doctrine was first put forward in the Book of Mormon when it talked about the dark-skinned, evil Lamanites and the white and delightsome righteous Nephites, and it was further embodied in the Pearl of Great Price when it actually talks about the mark of Cain, but it wasn't necessarily focused on that much during the Joe years. In fact, one of the points where the church came under so-called persecution was due to their stance on abolitionism. The church wanted to outlaw slavery, which makes sense because it was born out of a Northern Union state. You know, I don't think New York was actually considered a Union state until the rising of the Confederacy, but it was a free state when Joe was born, so there weren't any slaves there. So it makes sense that they would include that abolitionist tenet in Mormonism. A few of the mobs that persecuted Mormons were formed strictly due to Mormonism's stance on slavery. Now, I need to be clear here because Joe himself wasn't necessarily an abolitionist. Given some of his quotes, he didn't oppose slavery, but he didn't necessarily support the practice either. This is a quote from Joseph Smith about slavery that makes his stance pretty much clear as mud. Quote, "We have no right to interfere with slaves, contrary to the mind and will of their masters. In fact, it would be much better and more prudent not to preach at all to slaves until after their masters are converted, and then teach the masters to use them with kindness, remembering that they are accountable to God, and the servants are bound to serve their masters with singleness of heart without murmuring. End quote. So, like I said, Joe didn't necessarily endorse slavery, but he wasn't really opposed to it either. I mean, it's kind of clear as mud. However, a lot of people that were joining the church from the northeastern states were opposed to it, and that just sort of materialized into abolitionism, which people hated the church for a lot. So Joe's nuanced opinion of black people was really embodied in this next quote I'm going to read, and it will show you how much Bloody Brigham differed or how much further Brigham took this. So this is from Joseph here, quote, "Had I anything to do with the Negro, I would confine them by strict law to their own species," end quote. See, Joe was a little more apathetic when it came to his opinions on black people, whereas Brigham went full fucking tilt with it. Let's hear a little more from Brigham on his opinion of African Americans. Quote, "Shall I tell you the law of God in regard to the African race? If the white man who belongs to the chosen seed mixes his blood with the seed of Cain," meaning black people, "the penalty under the law of God is death on the spot. This will always be so." End quote. Yes. The founding prophet of the Brighamite Salt Lake chapter of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints said that if any white people get a little frisky with any black people, they will both die on the spot, and that will always be so. I recently had a request to do a clean cut episode on blacks in the priesthood, kind of like I did with the Book of Mormon, only nowhere near as long. And I think it'll have to be soon. That's going to be, I'm really going to have to jump on that soon here. I mean, there's just way too much to include in this episode when it comes to Mormon racism. But here's one last quote from Bloody Brigham regarding racism. Quote, "You see some classes of the human family that are black, uncouth, uncomely, disagreeable, and low in their habits, wild, and seemingly deprived of intelligence." End quote. Yep. Welcome to Bloody Brigham. All right. Let's put those horribly racist quotes to bed until we really dig into blacks in the priesthood. Let's discover some of Bloody Brigham's more bloody quotes. Let's see where that bloody really comes in. When I say he was a bloody theocratic ruler, these are some of the quotes that I'm using to come to that conclusion. We begin by examining his most well-known commandment, and that is blood atonement. Basically, he called Mormons to avenge the blood of Joseph Smith, and to teach it to their progenitors to the third and fourth generation. I believe blood atonement was removed from the temple ceremony in like the early 90s or something, but there's still like a bastardized version of it today. Quote, "I will take the government of the United States and the laws of Missouri and Illinois from the year 1833 to 1845, and if they had been carried out according to their letter and spirit, they would have strung up the murderers and mobocrats who illegally and unrighteously killed, plundered, harassed, and expelled us. I will tell you how much I love these characters. If they had any respect to their own welfare, they would come forth and say, whether Joseph Smith was a prophet or not, 'We shed his blood, and now let us atone for it.' And they would be willing to have their heads chopped off, that their blood might run upon the ground, and the smoke of it rise before the Lord as an incense for their sins. I love them that much." End quote. How intensely batshit nutty was that? I mean, Brigham says he loved the people that killed Joe so much that he wants to shed their blood, chop off their heads, bleed them out in the streets, and burn their bodies as a sin offering to the Lord. That's how much he loves them. I'll just let that sit while we read a couple more of these bloodthirsty quotes. This is the next one, quote, "Suppose you found your brother in bed with your wife and put a javelin through both of them, you would be justified, and they would atone for their sins and be received into the kingdom of God. I would at once do in such a case, and under such circumstances. I have no wife whom I love so well that I would not put a javelin through her heart, and I would do it with clean hands." End quote. Oh my god, he's so fucking insane. I mean, he loves his wives so much that if he catches any of them cheating on him, he'll drive a javelin through him and whoever they're cheating with, and he'll do it with clean hands. It's just fucking insane. I have nothing to add. I'm speechless. Let's go to the next one. Quote, "The time is coming when justice will be laid to the line and righteousness to the plummet, when we shall take the old broadsword and ask, 'Are you for God?' And if you are not heartily on the Lord's side, you will be hewn down. I feel like reproving you. You are like a wild ass that rears and almost breaks his neck before he will be tamed. It is so with this people." End quote. So that might be the quote that DeWitt was referring to, where Brigham threw his head back and drew the line across his throat, implying slicing. But I mean, it was given in direct reaction that was, to some strife that was going on in Utah at the time. Brigham was chastising the members of the church for disobeying him. And then he threatened them, metaphorically otherwise, with death by broadsword. In fact, it can be interpreted that anybody that isn't for the church is definitionally against and called an apostate here, and therefore deserves the, quote, plummet of the broadsword. I mean, are some of the things that Aaron DeWitt claimed in his letter really starting to come to life? I mean, are we really beginning to understand Brigham in all of his bloody glory? Just in case those quotes weren't convincing enough, let me present one more like that. I mean, it's a little bit longer, but it's amazing. And it starts out describing a dreamscape that Brigham envisioned. Quote, "By and by, along came some mobocrats, and they greeted them with, 'How do you do, sir? I'm happy to see you.' They kept on that way for an hour." So when he's saying mobocrats there, he's using that as a reference to anybody that forms a mob against the church, which was the people that drove him out of Kirtland, the people that drove him out of far west and out of Quincy, and all of the mobs that formed. He's just calling them all mobocrats. Yeah, kind of a catchy word for him. Anyway, he continues, "I felt ashamed of them, for they were in my eyes a disgrace to Mormonism. Then I saw two ruffians, who I knew to be mobbers and murderers, and they crept into a bed where one of my wives and children were. I said, 'You that call yourselves brethren, tell me, is this the fashion among you?' They said, 'Oh, they are good men, they are gentlemen.' With that, I took my large Bowie knife, that I used to wear as a bosom pin in Nauvoo, and cut one of their throats from ear to ear, saying, 'Go to hell across lots!' The other one said, 'You dare not serve me so.' I instantly sprang at him, seized him by the hair of the head, and bringing him down, cut his throat and sent him after his comrade, and then told both of them, if they would behave themselves, they should yet live, but if they did not, I would unjoint their necks. At this I awoke. I say, rather than that apostates should flourish here, I will unsheath my Bowie knife and conquer or die. Now, you nasty apostates, clear out, or judgment will be put to the line, and righteousness to the plummet. If you say it is right, raise your hands. Let us call upon the Lord to assist us in this and every good work." End quote. Holy fuck. So maybe that was the quote that DeWitt was talking about, where he did the little, ear to ear thing. So, okay, let's deconstruct this fucking thing, because this is crazy. In this dream, Brigham saw a couple of men that he described as ruffians, mobocrats, murderers, whatever. And, that could pretty much be anybody that he deems to be a disgrace to Mormonism, including and especially apostates, according to this quote before this one. Then he described them getting into his bed with his wife and child. He then took out his Bowie knife, and I don't know what this means, but he used to wear it as a bosom pin, and he slashed one of the men's throats, telling him to go to hell. The other man made the mistake of daring Brigham to assault him with the Bowie knife, and of course Brigham didn't even hesitate, taking the man by the hair of the head and slitting his throat open. When he told the men in the dream that if they did not obey, he would unjoint their necks, at which point he awoke. And then the quote goes, fucking insane. Because, I mean, to really add a cherry on top of this savage diatribe, to make it complete, Brigham said that he will unsheath his Bowie knife and conquer or die, rather than allow apostates to flourish in Utah. I should note that in the Journal of Discourses, there's a little sidebar when he said this, and it reads, quote, "Great commotion in the congregation and a simultaneous burst of feeling assenting to the declaration," end quote. So, I mean, after this, Bloody Brigham drives the point home and says, "You nasty apostates, clear out or judgment will be put to the line." And he finished saying that with the crowd roaring and saying, "Let us call upon the Lord to assist us in this and every good work." Now, I don't care if this sounds like religiousist or something, but he should have just capped the whole damn thing off with Allahu Akbar or something. I mean, he had constructed the caliphate already. He was free from any legal prosecution. He openly gave every single apostate a death threat. He didn't even veil it at all. He just straight up called the apostates to death, just like a Muslim extremist would call a kuffar to beheading or something. Is it any wonder why apostasy is treated the way it is in Mormonism? Believing members have had shit like this to fill their minds since the inception of the LDS Church. If you leave, you die. Nowadays, it's considered a spiritual death or something, ending in outer darkness. But in Bloody Brigham's time, it was a much more realistic concern with life and death implications. You really wonder how many people suffered the wrath of Brigham's Bowie knife or command thereof for the crime of apostasy. I think DeWitt's letter gives us some kind of idea of what happened, but there's no telling just how connected Brigham was to those various deaths, or if they were indeed for apostasy. I mean, they're just... I'm not sure what to make of all of it. It's just all so twisted and wrong and just wicked. It's evil. It makes me feel dirty. Alright. We've taken Bloody Brigham apart with these quotes, and he deserves every possible bit of scrutiny we can raise against him. We understand why he was given the nickname Bloody Brigham, which I can't seem to find anywhere, but I know I've seen that name Bloody Brigham in a contemporary source about him somewhere, but I can't find it. But now that we know a little bit about the bloody side of Brigham, let's try and understand the moronic side. One of the most well-known teachings that Brigham is responsible for is Adam-God doctrine. This is the doctrine that teaches that Adam was actually God of Earth, sent by Elohim or something like that to organize matter into Earth as we know it. It's confusing, and honestly, it's been scoffed at for quite some time, and most apologists have come up with a lot of different ways to rationalize this wacky doctrine that doesn't seem to comport with anything or everything that the church teaches today concerning the matter. A quick search on Fair Mormon pulls up the apologetics offered in defense of the Adam-God doctrine. It looks like they have 5 separate defenses for it. First, let's hear one of the many quotes Brigham left behind about Adam-God doctrine, and then we'll talk about the apologetics that defend it. Quote, "Father Adam came here and helped make the earth. Then he said, 'I want my children who are in the spirit world to come and live here. I want my children that were born to me in the spirit world to come here and take tabernacles of flesh.'" End quote. All right, there you go. Like I said, that was one of many, many, many quotes that Brigham has about Adam actually being God. And I'm just as confused about it as Mormon apologists are, and they've had some of their best apologists on the subject for a very, very long time. Now, I have to tell you here, most of the older generation of Mormons usually know about this Adam-God doctrine, but they just scoff at it or ignore it. I mean, I remember having a discussion with a family member about crazy Mormon doctrine, and they made the claim that there's a lot of crazy Mormon stuff that I probably don't know about, and I agree. They listed Adam-God doctrine as one of those things. To be clear, this person is a believer and continues to be a believer despite any contradictory doctrines they know about Mormon history, including Adam-God doctrine. So I'll briefly describe the apologist answers for this Brigham teaching because it's utterly hilarious. There's 5 of them, like I said earlier. Number 1, Adam as patriarch of the human family. Okay, so some people claim that Adam was merely the father of the priesthood on earth, therefore is God of the humans or something, being the first to receive the priesthood. And this is a horribly confusing explanation for it, and Fair Mormon even says at the end of this explanation that it ignores a fair amount of what Brigham said on the matter. So, I mean, we can kind of lay that one to rest. Number 2, scribal error. This is an absolutely absurd claim that the scribes merely copied what Brigham said wrong, and that he didn't mean to say that Adam was God or, something, or Adam, they just say that they copied it down wrong. And this is completely absurd. And even the Fair Mormon article says that it doesn't explain the multiple instances in which Brigham preached about it very, very explicitly, where there couldn't be a scribal error. Number 3, Adam Sr. and Adam Jr. So this apologetic implies that Brigham was using the word Adam as kind of like a catch-all word. It says that maybe he meant Adam Jr. is like the Adam that was the first physical man on earth, commanded by Adam Sr., God, to organize the earth, but I mean, it's just so convoluted. But if that's the case, why was he so explicit saying Adam is God so many times without ever drawing a distinction between Adam Jr. and Adam Sr.? This is an absurd apologetic and a horrible way to try and sweep this doctrine under the rug. Apologetic number 4, Brigham was wrong. Interesting. Because this is by far the most convincing of all of the apologetics offered for this. But the implications are really damning. That's the problem with it. The apologetic says that Brigham was a man, and that the revelations given by God could have been misinterpreted by his fallible human nature. Alright, let's grant that for a minute and say that Adam-God doctrine was merely a false interpretation of Revelation, and he just went on to continue teaching it forever and ever, and, he died believing that Adam-God doctrine was true, and, he was never corrected by God. He was never taken off of the planet before he led the members of the church astray. He taught this incorrect doctrine for many years. Let's chase that to its logical conclusion, right? Are there any other doctrines that Brigham Young taught that were merely fallible interpretations of God's will? I mean, how far do we let that logic train go before it derails? And the same question can be asked about Joseph Smith, too. He gave plenty of revelations that were false, and the throwaway excuse is something along the lines of, well, Joseph was a fallible man, and, sometimes revelations were of God, some were from the devil, and some were from man. I mean, honestly, how far out of the barn can we walk this horse before it can't be walked back in? There's no way to chase this to a logical conclusion saying, okay, this person gave this one revelation that was false, but every other revelation they gave was incontrovertibly true. That's just absurd. That's completely insane. All right, apologetic number 5 for Adam-God doctrine. We don't know the reason. Well, I know I said that apologetic number 4 was the most convincing, where they just said that Brigham was wrong, but this is actually even better. I like number 5 even more. Just simply saying we have no idea what is meant by Adam-God doctrine as taught by Brigham Young, and we'll clear it all up when we die, is probably the most pathetic yet convincing argument to explain away this huge problem. But I have to admit, if the best apologetics that can be offered for something that is no longer a teaching of the Mormon Church is, helpless shrug, maybe Brigham was wrong, or, I no fucking idea, bro, then my work is done. I mean, I don't have to argue against the apologetics offer for it, nor do I need to challenge the doctrines logically in the first place. The simple fact that Adam-God doctrine exists in Mormon history is plenty damning enough, and it requires little more discussion or, just even arguments. It just requires very little looking at to understand that it's all just steaming bullshit. Now, I just want to clarify here. I took all 5 of those apologetics straight from the Fair Mormon article, and there will be a link to that article in the show notes in case you want to read the reasons for yourself. I recommend it because I don't think any believing member can see an article like this and still believe Brigham Young was a true prophet of God. I mean, he revealed this teaching of Adam God doctrine, and even the apologetics today, 130 years later, are like, I got nothing. I have no idea how to explain this. It's beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful. And the last quote that we read from Brigham Young, I think, is really going to tie this all together really well. I'm excited for it. But for now, let's get to a couple more of these really controversial and more kooky quotes that Brigham taught. Quote, "Moon men dressed like Quakers must have the true gospel revealed to them by missionaries from the earth." End quote. Yep, moon men dressed like Quakers. So maybe that's where the $60 billion in church assets will be diverted soon. Interplanetary mission forces, ho! I mean, I'm willing to bet that you could fund one hell of a space program with $60 billion in liquefied access. But I mean, the next quote is an even more special kind of stupid. Quote, "Do you think it," implying the sun, "is inhabited? I rather think it is. Do you think there is any life there? No question of it. It was not made in vain. It was made to give light to those who dwell upon it." End quote. Oh, I love it. He's so fucking insane. Okay, so the inhabitants of the sun must have like some really awesome heat resistant shoes or something, because the surface of the sun is almost 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit or 5,500 degrees Celsius for our non-imperial friends. So I mean, God, I just love Mormon history so much. You get to see all kinds of incontrovertible proofs of its demonstrable falsehood, and all you have to do is sort through 185 years of documents to find the gems like this. Oh, God, it's amazing. The next quote is the last one we're going to read from good old Bloody Brigham today, but like I said, I think it really sums things up nicely. And this quote is going to finish out the historical portion of today's episode. I hope you're ready for this. Quote, "I am here to give this people, called Latter-day Saints, counsel to direct them in the path of life. I am here to answer. I shall be on hand to answer when I am called upon. For all the counsel and for all the instruction that I have given to this people. If there is an elder here or any member of this church called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who can bring up the first idea, the first sentence that I have delivered to the people as counsel that is wrong, I really wish they would do it. But they cannot do it for the simple reason that I have never given counsel that is wrong. This is the reason." That's too much. There's no arguing against it, right? People apparently can't call him out on anything that he said as being wrong because he's never said anything that's wrong. Oh, Brigham Young, I love you. I'm so glad you're getting in the timeline now. You're going to be such a wild card. Yes, all of that, everything that we read just came out of Bloody Brigham's mad fucking skull. What else do you need? I mean, I find myself at a complete loss of words to close us out today. It's amazing. I mean, fuck. I've said it dozens of times. One of the things that, one of them was just a second ago, but I love Mormon history. Yes, it does take a lot of parsing through to understand. Yes, it requires a large body of knowledge to understand. Yes, it does require focusing on one single topic like Brigham Young for a long time and trying to chase that rabbit hole to the bottom, if there actually is a bottom to said metaphorical rabbit hole. But before doing the research for this episode, I knew almost nothing about Brigham Young. He's a character in Mormon history that's shrouded in mystery, and he's responsible for so many things, yet believers know almost nothing about him. I mean, from my Mormon upbringing, I remember one thing about Brigham Young. I can recall one thing from his history, and even that one thing is a little tiny bit wrong. I remember being told that Brigham Young led the first handcart company out to Utah, and upon descending the Rocky Mountains into view of the Great Salt Lake, he said, "This is the place," and, planted his staff or whatever it was. It's this dramatic thing in Mormon history. I mean, there's even a monument and like a amusement park sort of thing where he supposedly declared that statement. It's actually right across the street from Hogle Zoo, and it's called Heritage Park in Salt Lake. Just barely east of Salt Lake. Now, I remember going there for like all kinds of mutual and scouting activities, or just to see the model train that they have, or do stick pulling competitions or trek day activities or whatever. It's really an awesome park for Mormons, and it's all built on a lie. Yeah, well, not really a lie, but a slight altering of the truth. You see, when Brigham Young led the handcart company into the Salt Lake Valley, after his scouts had gone ahead to see what was ahead, and they finally got to the Salt Lake Valley, he said, "This is the right place." Now, that altering of his exact quote doesn't matter one little bit. It's completely inconsequential, and it has absolutely no historical implication. There's no reason why it should be changed. But I'm getting at the root of the problem here. Growing up in the church, the only one thing that I knew about Brigham Young was a quote, and it was altered from the real quote. I mean, I knew a little bit about Joseph Smith, and, I had heard that John Taylor's pocket watch saved his life in Carthage, but Brigham Young was just a mysterious historical visage that didn't have any real form or personality, and this is a damned tragedy. Brigham Young is responsible for so much in Mormon history, especially the Utah years until 1877 when he died. He's the one guiding hand that colonized much of the Mormon stripe, spanning from Mexico to Canada and east to west from Nevada to Colorado and beyond. I mean, I was recently in a discussion with somebody about history in general and why I didn't take any advanced history classes in high school or college. I told her it was because I wasn't taught history right. You see, history throughout public schooling is nothing beyond memorizing names and dates. At least that's my own experience. It's a clinical understanding of history, and that is helpful, don't get me wrong. But when you remove the human element, it's just that. Only names and dates. It's when you talk about the people involved and the things that they did that history becomes a fun and worthwhile endeavor to study. I told that person that if I would have been taught about people instead of occurrences, then I would probably have a degree in history right now because it fascinates me so much. That person then went on to raise a very good point. She said there's no possible way of knowing what a person really did in history because you're always reading a biased recounting of the tale, which is completely true. There's no such thing as objective history, especially when you're talking about a story recounted from an extremely biased individual, which is almost always the case. In response to this point, of course, I completely agreed and told her that it's a problem I run into constantly, and it's very, very, very frustrating. And I have to admit it. I have to wrestle with it all the time. I'm incredibly subject to the same biased reporting in this show. I know the sources that I like to get my information from, and it's tough to deviate from those sources once I'm comfortable with them. Now, honestly, I do try to balance where I get the information from between so-called pro and anti-Mormon sites because I have an interest in objectivity, which is exactly why I presented the arguments about Adam God doctrine that are published by the church's official apologetics website, fairmormon.org. I'm there all the time. I love going to that place. I mean, I'm always in the pursuit of fact-based evidence, right? But that doesn't remove my bias from this podcast, and it sure as hell doesn't remove the bias from the person that initially recorded whatever it is that I'm presenting. And really, I think that's where public history education fails even more, at least in my experience. I was never extremely interested in history in general because it was taught to me wrong. However, there's a bigger point where it fails above that. Beyond just only learning names and dates instead of, learning what people did, I was never taught the tools for parsing out bias. Historians use a tool bag worth of ideas and practices all of the time in order to parse out bias and get rid of it and try and find facts. And that's how historical and comparative studies work and how they should work. You do that. You focus on one occurrence, like a war or a single person or whatever it might be, and then you use tools to try and parse the facts out of the biased accounts regarding said occurrence. That really controversial stuff that I talked about earlier with Quinn's work on same-sex relations happening in the early church is very biased. Quinn is gay, and that's why I brought it up, is because there is a bias present. And he was arguably a believer in the church, even though he was resigned and excommunicated as one of the September 6 in 1993. I mean, it's understandable that he would grasp at anything to try and reconcile his belief in a homophobic church with being gay himself, and those are diametrically opposed concepts. I understand why he's the historian that's brought this research to the light. But to be honest, in reading some of the other information that's presented in support of Joe or anybody else having same-sex relations in Nauvoo or Utah, the evidence is very, very scarce. Now, I'm not saying that it's non-existent or it's wrong or that an argument can't be built on that evidence, because I'm in no position to speculate on such matters with my limited knowledge and, my lack of actual historianship. I like to read and report history, but I don't know the tools for parsing out bias. I only do a very armchair job of it. But the larger point that I'm getting at is the ever-present bias in historical studies and the tools necessary for identifying those biases. If I would have been taught historical studies and then given the tools for distilling the facts out of the biased presentation, I feel like I would have eaten up history in public schooling. The person I was talking to here in this same conversation, I asked the question of something along the lines of, what's better? For a person to take historical classes and be bored with the content, or to be told fascinating historical stories that are fun and interesting and, grabs their attention, and then be given the tools to understand the facts that are presented, even though the account that they're reading is biased, regardless of who's presenting that. Now, I ask you, the listener, in studying Mormon history, there's no way of getting a truly unbiased account, as with all history. What's more interesting? Knowing that Brigham Young joined the church in 1832, took over the church in 1844, moved the pioneers out to Utah in 1847, and died in 1877? Or would you much rather have him presented in the way that we just studied him, with all of his bruises, warts, and racist insanity completely intact, not whitewashed away or swept under the rug? What's more fascinating? And this gets to my biggest problem with the church, and I harp on it all of the time. Why hide this? Why deprive members of this knowledge by sheer omission alone? If there's anything that bothers me about the church, it's not the large-scale funding of homophobic legislature. It's not the us versus them mentality given to believers that frighten them from having even the most cordial conversation with a known apostate. Hell, it's not even the $60 billion in assets all built on a lie and subsidized by my tax dollars. It's the wholesale suppression of knowledge and instilling fear of the unknown. What is truth? Really, what is truth? The church claims that it has the truth and reveres itself as possessing the most correct book on the planet, the Book of Mormon. And it's merely a construct of what the majority of the members believe. But what does the word truth mean? I remember watching a series of YouTube videos produced by Chris Johnson called My LDS Journey. And one of the things he presented was his study of Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, as a believing Mormon, Chris couldn't stand the thought of his church not being true, so he found a real-world analog to the Mormon cult, and of course that was the Jehovah's Witnesses cult. It's a very fitting example, and I really like how he presented it. I mean, let's face it, J-dubs have teachings and beliefs that are altogether detrimental, much like Mormonism. They have a cult mentality when it comes to the leadership of the church, they have a proprietary publication called the Watchtower, and they encourage and they require shunning when a friend or a family member leaves the church. The problem comes in when you try to challenge what they consider truth. Jehovah's Witnesses, as with a lot of religious people, have replaced the word truth in their own vocabulary with the church. When a witness says that the church is true, they are merely stating the truth is true. Now, I get that, and it makes sense when you dive into the studies of word association. When you challenge a witness, it comes into conflict with their understanding of what truth is because you're forcing them to think the truth isn't true. That's where the cognitive dissonance comes into play, and the person can either confront the awkward feeling of thinking the truth isn't true, or ignore it and default on the challenge that's being presented. That's the power of associating the church with truth. The same phenomenon happens with Mormons. As soon as you say the church isn't true or the Book of Mormon isn't true, it's the same as telling the person that the truth isn't true. And that's the biggest problem in the church that so strongly draws the ire out of me and forces me to be so vitriolic against it. How dare they hide this history from their members? How dare they deprive believers of learning this fascinating aspect of American history in an effort to insulate the helpless parishioners from the anti-Mormon temptings of the adversary? How dare they lay claim to the truth when it can be broken by inquisition from a toddler? I love discussing Mormon history with anybody that's willing to have the conversation, but when the person I'm trying to have that discussion with shuts down because of one piece of information I present, the fire burns in my bosom and I have to force myself not to grab the person by the shoulders and shake them awake. What the fuck does truth mean if not that which is most true? Truth isn't subjective. Truth cannot be found in any one single book. Truth isn't what an old guy says or what a pedophilic womanizer said 185 years ago. Truth is definitionally objective, and it comes in direct conflict with so much of what the church claims as truth. If lying about or covering up Mormon history was the only negative thing that the church did, it's unforgivable. If forcing its members to not question or study the teachings of the church or its own sordid past were the only thing the church were doing, it's a drain on society. I can ignore all the other problems with blacks in the priesthood, with the fracturing of same-sex families, with insular communal mindsets, with requiring money from every single member and not allowing them exaltation without that donation. I can ignore all of that if this wasn't the one huge problem with the believing LDS frame of mind. But what can I say? I'm a lover of words. And when you fuck with a word as strong as truth, you deserve to have your self-proclaimed truth broken. All right, and a couple of new patrons to thank. First off, we had two new NAMO adolescent rebels to thank. We had Eric J. and Aaron G. Thank you guys both very much for being supporting the show. I really do appreciate it. Next, had a new NAMO demon to thank. Ooh, all right, a new demon. Another Eric J, spelled with a C instead of a K. Eric, thank you very, very much. That is fantastic of you. I mean, NAMO demons, that's where this show really gets a lot of the support for, a lot of the sustainable support. So just thank you so very much, Eric, for pledging that amount. That's really, really awesome of you. I appreciate it. Uh-oh. What is this? I hear something prowling in the darkness. What is happening? We have a new NAMO Baphomet. Baphomet David. David, you have officially ascended all but one rank of all NAMO Outer Darkness, and you ascend to the level of ruler of outer darkness. Of course, there's still an ever darkness presence that's out there that nobody knows much about, but, David, you are fantastic. Your valiance and effort in this level of patronage will never be forgotten, and you will forever have my express gratitude and the thanks of everybody that listens to this show. David, thank you very much, and I hope to be in touch with you very soon. Alright, that was all the patrons. Let me do a quick listener mail segment here. Got in an email just this morning, actually, from Ben. He said, "Hi, I've been enjoying your podcast recently, and in the last one you spoke of a letter in a time capsule opened in Logan in 1989. I've been trying to look up the whole letter. I was hoping you could tell me the source. I grew up LDS my whole life, and around 2008, waiting for my mission call, I started learning about the history. I never went on my mission. Congratulations! And I don't consider myself LDS anymore. But like you, it all fascinates me. Thank you for your hard work." Dude, Ben, thank you very, very much. Congratulations, dude, on not going on your mission. Man, if only more people could study Mormon history and the church itself before they go, instead of studying it by the church and what the church tells them, I think there'd be a lot less Mormon missionaries out there. But yeah, I didn't see this email until just now when I'm doing this listener mail segment. But yeah, that letter, like I said, I had a hard time finding it when I just read it in here on this episode today. It used to be on saintsalive.com, but that domain got taken over by somebody else. So that email or that letter, I had to dig and dig and dig and dig to find it. So that letter is included in One Nation Under Gods by Richard Baines, and I haven't read the book, but that's where I found out about it, and I am going to and where I found it was just buried in this blog post from a couple of years ago, and it was fucking buried. I had to search forever to find that. So like I said, the entire letter is going to be in this episode's show notes. Just for quick reference, if anybody ever wants to find the Aaron DeWitt letter talking about Brigham Young, it's in the show notes of this episode 27. So, thanks for sending in the email there, Ben. I appreciate that. Got in an email from Alan. He said, on a few of your recent episodes, you've talked about the status of women in the church, and you were searching for a term or label to describe it. There is one, derivative status. Very well said. It's used mainly in immigration law, but it pretty much perfectly describes how women in the church have no status of their own, but rather receive their status via their husbands. Also, exactly mirroring its use in immigration, it is through their husbands that they get their ticket to heaven. Oh, yes, Alan, thank you for sending that in. That's a perfect way to describe it. I should have used it in the episode today, but derivative status, that's what it is. They're nothing but a piece of property, and they derive their glory or their status based off of whatever owns them or whoever owns them. So that's, yeah, you just said that very, very well. Thank you for sending in that email, Alan. That was awesome. Got in an email from Sebastian. He just said really quickly, I'm slowly working my way through your podcast. Thank you for making them. And Sebastian, well, thank you for sending in the email. And I really like to see all those emails. Even if people aren't, don't elaborate or anything, or it doesn't mean a whole lot to somebody to write in those emails. I enjoy getting every one of those. So, Sebastian, thank you for sending in that it's encouraging and I appreciate it. Got in an email from Jim, and he was actually the guy that requested that I do the clean cut episode on the blacks in the priesthood. And like I said, Jim, that's going to be coming up pretty soon. I'm not sure exactly when I'm going to be cranking that thing out, but it will be fairly soon. And just keep your eye out for it. And I think it's I think it's pretty awesome. And there's a lot about Mormon history and with blacks in the priesthood, and just just racism in general, and that's a topic that doesn't get enough press, I don't think. So, yeah, that'll be the next Clean Cut episode that I do, and, it won't be anywhere near as long as the Book of Mormon Clean Cut, but it'll be coming out pretty soon. So, yeah, keep an eye out for that. Thanks for sending in the email, Jim. Got an email from Chris, and he sent a link to an episode of a BBC podcast called Thinking Aloud. Each episode is 28 minutes long, and they have a couple of interviews, and the second half of the episode that he linked is really, really relevant to Joseph Smith. And I have to admit, I listened to it, and it is a really, really fascinating episode. It's talking about basically just con men and people that are hustlers in New York, and people that just make a living based on on hustling, on conning people. A great example that was given was, one of the guys that was talking in the interview was telling a story about one of his guys that was, one of the people he was talking to that was a hustler. He just pulled out, this wad of cash, and I think he called it like a Chicago billfold or something, where there's like a 20 or 50 on the outside, but a bunch of ones on the inside. So it just looks like a whole bunch of money. And he's like, at that moment, he saw that his mark had his eyes on the money, and, he knew that no matter what the hustler said to the mark, he was going to do it. And it was really, really fascinating. So yes, I recommend checking out that episode. It's really full of good information, and there's good interviews. And, there will be a link to that in the show notes. But yeah, thanks for sending in the email, Chris. I appreciate it. Got in an email from Kyle, and, it was really, really interesting. He sent one email with an attachment, which, if you listen to the intro, his voice was the, who you heard for the intro. That's Kyle. And his email just said, "Thank you for so much." And that was it with the attachment. And I'm like, what? So I sent him back an email, well, okay, thank you for sending in the clip. What's going on? Do I know you? And he said, no, just, he's just struggling and wanting to come out of the church. His wife is a convert and so on and so forth. And he just told me a little bit about a story, and he's really enjoying the show, and just he has an insatiable thirst for knowledge, just like myself. And yeah, dude, I wish you the best of luck, Kyle, and I really hope everything ends up working out for you. I know it's really tough to work your way out of the church. It's really not an easy thing to do, but it can be done. And I haven't met a single person that's on this side that regrets coming out of the church. So, dude, it may not be really good right now. It may suck. It may be, tough to deal with, like family members and stuff that are questioning you, or, calling you an apostate or whatever. But, dude, it gets better. That's all I can say. It gets better. Just hang in there, and it'll all be good soon. So, thank you for sending in the email, Kyle, and for sending in the audio clip. I appreciate that. Got an email from John Draper. Somebody might know him as the guy that wrote Danger to God himself, and he sent me a copy of his book, and I'm hoping to have him on the show once I finish the book. I'm just about halfway through it right now, and it's fascinating as hell. So, John, I wanted to say just thank you for sending in the email and for sending me a copy of the book, and I look forward to talking to you and, having you on for a special edition episode. That'll be a lot of fun. Got an email in from JC, and it just fucking broke my heart. I hope he doesn't mind. I'm not using his last name, because he asked me not to, and I usually don't use people's last names, but I think I'm going to read this because it is really, it's a really powerful email, and it really moved me to get this. He says, "First off, I'm writing to thank you so much. I started listening when I first heard you from David Michael and thought it quirky and just interesting enough to keep listening, and now I can't wait for the next podcast, and I know the books will rock." And this is where it becomes, it fucking tugged my heartstrings. On a personal note, I want to share how your show has helped me deal with the loss of my baby brother, a 33-year-old gay alcoholic who just barely got the courage to resign from the church before he died. His life was looking up, but the wounds ran too deep and took a little too much one day trying to numb the pain. Your show has greatly helped me in the grieving process to channel my anger. Who cares if my coworkers see me break down sobbing, apparently out of the blue, while listening to you? Dude, JC, that is just amazing. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't like to hear about people dying, but just hearing that somebody had the fortitude to leave after, being wounded by the church so much like that. That's exactly who this show is made for. I mean, I don't make this show just for people to learn about Mormon history. I make it as a therapy for people that are coming out of the church, or people that are angry about what's happened to them in the church or their experience. And I want it to, I want to speak to those people. And it looks like, from the sound of your email, it looks like I kind of hit the mark on it. And JC, thank you so much. That means the absolute world to me when somebody is willing to tell me how much they appreciate what is presented here, because that's what I'm striving for. That's what I'm really trying to put into this, because I want to see people benefit from it. And on a personal note, I'm very, very sorry to hear of your loss. I understand that family loss like that is very, very tough, and I'm lucky enough not to have to have dealt with much of it in my own life. But that's because I'm only in my 20s. I know that the older I get, that'll happen more. But I mean, I'm just so sorry to hear about that. But it's profound. Thank you very much, JC. Thanks for sending in the email. All right, just had a quick update. This episode is coming out on. Well, I'm actually recording it the day that it's coming out here, Thursday the 4th. And, is it the 4th? It is the 4th. Yeah, Thursday the 4th. So this episode's coming out on Thursday the 4th, and Friday the 5th, so tomorrow from when this episode comes out, or basically the day this episode comes out, is when the Brody Awards close, which is a nomination and voting based awards system, award for basically anything that's ex-Mormon stuff online. So the polls for the Brody Awards are going to close today. The show has been nominated for 4 separate Brody Awards. We got a Best New Podcast for the whole show. Joe the Ignoramus in the Book of Pukei for Best Post Title. We have Joseph Smith Disorderly Disgrace for Best Original Research. And then we have the category of Best Scripture Study Piece for the 7.5 hour CC Book of Mormon episode. So those are the 4 categories the show has been nominated for, and I would really, really, really like to have anybody that's willing or thinks that the show is worth a Brody Award to go on to mainstreetplaza.com and vote for the show. 2015 Brody Awards are, the nominations are pretty much over by the time you're going to hear this, the voting, but it closes at midnight on February 5th. And, if you guys think that the show is worth winning an award, or if you want to vote for my Book of Mormon podcast, that'd be great as well. You can go on to Main Street Plaza and just, show a little love for the show. Of course, I voted for it, and I'm really excited. I'm hoping that it turns out pretty well, and, it's looking good. I'm excited. So, anybody that did nominate or has voted already, thank you so very much. And next episode I'll bring an update and see where it's gone. There's the update on that. Wanted to do a quick update on the this project that I keep hinting out. I've kind of decided to do something. I know that I've set out a Patreon goal to achieve, to start up another podcast when it gets to a certain level, but I think that's a wrong way to approach having Patreon goals. I've set out various Patreon goals and met them and whatnot, and that's fantastic, and it's really helpful, and I enjoy it. But maybe that's the wrong way to do it. Maybe I should say that I would like to get to this point after I give you guys the thing that I'm attempting to get to that goal with. So maybe the goal should be I'm going to produce this in order to get to that goal. So I'm working on the details of it right now, but I think it's going to be a podcast reading the possible source text for the Book of Mormon. And there's a lot of them out there, don't get me wrong. And I'm going to be doing a bit of research ahead of time before producing each episode. And that'll draw connections between the similarities between whatever we're reading in the Book of Mormon, verse citations and everything. So, it's a work in progress. I have a couple of episodes recorded right now. And if you're a patron, you're going to get a link to those episodes, to like a Dropbox or something, or a Google Drive with those episodes. And, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it and see if I can better it in any way. But the idea is I'd like to make it a whole interactive like website and everything, and, have the availability for people to go on and make it almost like a wiki where people can, edit in their own connections that they're finding between the Book of Mormon and whatnot. And so just to tell you, I have a clinical understanding of the Book of Mormon. I love it as a literary piece. It's a very fascinating piece of work, but I don't know the Book of Mormon very well. So I'm going to draw the connections between things that I find and that I can, recognize easily. But most of the people listening to this podcast know the Book of Mormon way better than I do. So if people want to listen to that podcast and listen to the possible connections that I'm drawing, or things that I miss, especially connections that are blatantly clear that I didn't mention or talk about, I think that'd be a really fun place to create this like online community of where people can go on and edit and add in their own comments based on the texts, and be able to read the text of the Book of Mormon and the late war and the first book of Jesus, and then the first book of Napoleon, and, the various books that are source text for the Book of Mormon, via the Hebrews, maybe even manuscript story, Conneaut Creek by Solomon Spaulding. I mean, there's a lot of connections there, and I don't know all of them, and I don't know the Book of Mormon well enough to consider it any sort of scholarly endeavor. But if it's a crowd research project, I think that could be something very fascinating to include as a chapter or two in the book that I have coming out about the Book of Mormon. So, that being said, I'm still working on it. I'm working out the kinks right now. I'll have updates on it the next episode that comes out. But yeah, that's how it's looking right now. So yeah, that's the main update I wanted to talk about for the upcoming show that I'm wanting to put out. Also, I did want to say, lately I've been amassing a lot of special edition episodes, a lot of interviews, and, I have quite a few in my backlog right now. And if I'm just sticking to this every 2 weeks schedule, it's going to kind of put a strain on the actual historical episodes, which is what people come to this show for. I mean, I know a lot of people do say they enjoy the special editions and the Exmo Hangout and whatnot, but I mean, all in all, this show is meant to be a historical deconstruction of Mormon history, right? So that's what I'm going to try and strive to do. I'm going to attempt to put out a historical episode every 2 weeks like I initially planned. But however, on the off weeks, that's when I'm planning on putting out the special edition episodes. Because, like I said, I have a lot of them amassing, and I have a lot more people in the queue right now that I'm trying to get lined up with interviews as well. So, we'll see how that pans out. That's the plan at the moment. I'm not sure how it'll go, but that's kind of what the plan is. I'm still keeping it the patronage 2 episodes per month. That's all any of the patrons will get charged. But yeah, that's kind of how it will go with that. And then, I should also say the separate podcast is going to have its own Patreon. Its own way to support if people are interested in supporting it as a separate endeavor. And yes, it's going to be clean. I'm not going to be cussing. I'm not going to be pissed off and, ranting and saying fuck all the time. So yes, it's going to be clean so you can recommend it to your believing Mormon friends. And yeah, that's all the updates I got. That's everything I can think of for today's episode. Before finishing up today, I'll need to thank a few people. I'll start off by thanking Kyle for sending in his voice for the intro of this episode. If you'd like to have your voice featured in the intro and your blog or podcast or group plugged, you can find the script on the website and simply email an MP3 of you saying those clips to nakedmormonism@gmail.com. Thanks to all of the patrons who support the show. If you'd like to be as awesome as those people, you can go to patreon.com/nakedmormonism and sign up to make a per episode donation. If you can't afford a couple of bucks a month, the price of a coffee, you can always help out the show a bunch by going onto iTunes or Stitcher or your podcast app of choice and leave a 5-star review for the show. I mean, it'll only cost a couple of minutes instead of a couple of bucks or a coffee. Thank you to everybody that shares the show through social media, Facebook, Twitter, and everything else like that. If you want to get in touch with me directly, email nakedmormonism@gmail.com, and I'll try to answer your questions during the next listener mail segment. Check out the show notes and a lot more information about the show on nakedmormonismpodcast.com. Thanks to Demonista and everybody for contributing to the Facebook page, where the discussion stays lively and exciting with lots of rich content. Thanks to Jason Camo for his musical genius that is used in the show with his permission. For more of his amazing stylings, you can go to aloststateofmind.com. For me, Bryce Blankenagel, I would like to thank you, especially the listener, for lending me your ear. I hope to talk at you next time here on the Naked Mormonism Podcast.